Hey guys, tonight you find yourself beneath the pale, uncertain light before dawn, standing in the outer bailey of a stone keep where the cold has teeth and the earth clings to your boots like it bears a personal grudge. The walls rise around you in damp grey slabs, beaded with mist, while smoke drifts lazily from the kitchens and hangs in the rafters of nearby sheds as though it, too, is too tired to keep moving. Beneath your feet, the rushes thrown over patches of stone have long since given up pretending to be fresh, and the smell is a faithful blend of wet straw, horse, soot, old ale, and winter air. Somewhere beyond the gatehouse, a river moves through the dark like a strip of dull iron, and every few moments you catch the clouded breath of a tethered horse rolling into the cold. Torchlight snaps along the wall walk, bells murmur from a distant priory, and medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You probably would not last a week out here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And do leave a comment with your location and local time, because there is something comforting in knowing who else is awake in the dark. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are no hero at this hour. Not yet. Not even close. When people think of knights, they imagine bright banners, polished helms, and the sort of dramatic charging that makes minstrels overconfident and horses deeply suspicious. What you're doing now is standing half awake in the cold, while a servant boy with red hands and a permanently doubtful face wrestles with a bucket near the stables. The water inside has a skin of ice so thin it breaks with a sigh when he jabs it. That, more than anything, feels like the truth of it. A night, when not in battle, belongs less to glory than to weather, routine, and the steady irritation of wool that never quite sits right at the shoulder. The keep around you stirs by degrees. First the stable lads, already muttering, then the kitchen folk, carrying wood and sloshing ale into the hall, then the watch changing on the wall, boots grinding frost into the stone. Above, narrow windows remain mostly dark, though one glows amber for a moment and then dulls, perhaps where some steward wakes early to count sacks, or where a chaplain reads by a beeswax candle too precious to waste on comfort. No one can quite agree whether castles look grander at dawn or merely colder, but from where you stand they seem designed chiefly to remind the body how small and underdressed it truly is. You draw your cloak close, fur brushing your chin, and breathe through the smell of horse and damp leather. Nearby, a groom rubs down a grey palfrey whose ears twitch at every sound. The animal turns one large eye toward you with the flat patience of a creature who has seen men declare themselves masters of creation while failing to button their own sleeves in the cold. The saddle hanging over the rail beside him is stiff from yesterday's wet ride. It will need oiling. Everything needs oiling. Mending, sweeping, drying, sharpening, scrubbing, or carrying. This is one of the great quiet truths of noble life for every moment of splendour. There are 10 of maintenance, and one of them is always happening before sunrise. A dog appears from under a cart, thin but cheerful, with the sort of expression that suggests it has adopted the castle several times and been ignored each time. It circles your boots, sniffs the mud, then settles just near enough to imply acquaintance without responsibility. You have seen it before, perhaps near the kitchens, perhaps outside the chapel door, perhaps nowhere at all. Castles gather dogs the way rafters gather smoke. No one fully owns them, yet somehow they know everything. Beyond the bailey, the gatehouse timbers groan. Men are already hauling back one of the smaller doors set into the great oak leaves of the main gate. Iron keys clink, chains scrape. A porter coughs with such commitment that it sounds hereditary. The world outside remains mostly shadow, but the road is there, and with it the fields, the village, the mill. The little shrine by the bend where travellers sometimes leave wax figures of aching limbs in hopes that a saint with a generous schedule might intervene. Some swear the shrine has cured fevers, toothaches, and a man once kicked by his own mule. Others say it mostly relieves purses of small coins. Both may be true. You begin to cross the bailey. Frost lingers in the seams between stones, and the rushes near the hall entrance are damp with tracked-in slush. The hall itself exhales warmth and smoke as a servant slips through the side door, his arms full of trenchers. Inside there will be long tables, benches rubbed smooth by years of use, soot-black rafters, and tapestries meant equally for decoration and for stopping the walls from breathing winter directly into your bones. But you are not there yet. First comes the castle waking, and you pass through it as through some slow old ritual. At the well, two women from the household talk in low voices while winding up a dripping bucket. Their aprons are already wet. One crosses herself after glancing toward the eastern sky, not because anything is wrong exactly, but because the day has begun, and many things are best met with a precautionary blessing. Medieval life is full of this sort of arrangement. A charm tied near a cradle, a sprig of herbs hung over a door, a bit of iron tucked where ill luck might trip over it. Even men in mail, even lords with seals and tenants and horses worth more than some cottages, live within a web of signs and habits that no one wishes to test by neglecting. From the chapel tower within the inner ward comes the first proper bell of the morning, thin at first, then fuller, folding over the walls and the roofs of sheds, over the kennel yard and the storehouse, over the village below, where smoke now begins to rise in small blue threads. Time here is not kept by clocks in the modern sense, but by bells, prayer, habit, light, and the reliable complaint of stomachs. The bell tells you the day is underway. It tells the cook to hurry, the steward to count, the chaplain to prepare, the sleepy page to regret last night's extra cup of ale, and you to remember that knighthood, outside the songs, is often a matter of being present at the proper hour in tolerably clean boots. As you pass under the shadow of the inner wall, you catch sight of the armourer's lean-to open at the front, where dull metal shapes hang like sleeping things. A hauberk rests over a wooden stand. It is not for battle today, most likely not tomorrow either. Yet it must be checked, links examined, leather straps replaced before they fail, buckles cleaned, rust fought constantly like an enemy too small for poetry. Beside it, a padded gambeson airs from a peg, and the smell of stale sweat rising from it could put a pilgrim off confession. There is another quiet truth. Even nobility smells mostly of effort. A page hurries by carrying a bundle of kindling nearly as large as himself. He bows mid-stride, overcommits to the gesture, and almost vanishes into a puddle. You steady him with one hand. He thanks you breathlessly and continues on, cheeks burning. Somewhere, perhaps later today, he will practice sword drills with a wooden waster and dream of tournaments. For now he is firewood with ambitions. You move toward the stables again, drawn by the warmth of animal bodies and the ordinary comfort of purposeful noise. Inside, the air changes at once. It is warmer here, though heavier, rich with hay, dung, leather, and the sweet dusty scent of grain. Horses stamp in their stalls. One chestnut turns its head and nudges the wooden partition, impatient for feed. A war horse is an expensive thunderbolt when mounted and armed, At breakfast time, he's mostly a large opinion with hooves. Grooms curry coats in firm, rhythmic strokes, check hooves for stones, sort bridles, and mutter judgments on everyone from the blacksmith to the weather to the entirely unreasonable habits of geese. You rest a hand on a stall door worn smooth by years of palms, rains, and restless teeth. This, too, belongs to a knight's life, not battle, but care. Knowing which mare goes lame in wet weather, remembering which gelding snaps at strangers, watching for saddle sores, inspecting feed, making sure a prize destrier is not ruined by a fool with a rough hand and a lazy eye. The work is shared, certainly. A knight of standing has grooms and boys and men below him in the order of labour. But to ignore the animals entirely would be seen not as noble but as foolish. Some swear a good horse can sense cowardice before a chaplain can. Others claim horses merely dislike stupid people. On balance, they may be among the more reliable judges in the castle. Outside, the sky has changed almost without your noticing. The east is no longer black but pearl grey, and the frost on the cart ruts glimmers faintly. The village below the hill comes clearer now, low roofs, crooked fences, a strip of muddy lane, the pale breath of cattle, a woman throwing slops, a child chasing nothing visible. Somewhere a cock crows with more confidence than accuracy. Another answers. Then, from farther off, the monastery bells sound once more, and the notes drift through the mist like something older than the walls around you. You stand for a moment in that sound. The dog has followed and now sits beside your boot, one ear bent, a candle, half burned from last night, still glows in a narrow slit window above the hall before finally guttering out. The day ahead will bring prayer, food, training, accounts, riding, courtesy, irritation, and all the small burdens that make a knight seem impressive, chiefly to those who do not have to live like one. But for now it is only dawn in the bailey. And you're here in the cold with stone, horse breath, and bells, while the castle gathers itself around you one careful sound at a time. The bell's last note still seems to linger in the cold air as you leave the stable-yard and make your way into the inner ward, where the stone underfoot is slick in patches and the morning feels stern enough to judge your posture. Dawn has now fully arrived, though it does so without generosity. The sky is a washed-out grey, the sort of colour that makes even a proud keep look as though it has slept badly. A servant opens the chapel door just long enough for a strip of candlelight to spill across the yard, and that thin golden line on the stones seems warmer than the whole of the rising day. You head first toward the little washing place beside the hall, because knightly dignity, however loudly praised in song, begins here with cold water and resignation. A wooden basin has been set out, and beside it a length of rough linen waits like a threat. The water in the ewer bites your fingers so sharply that for a moment it feels less like washing and more like a brief moral lesson. You splash your face, rub the sleep from your eyes, and try not to gasp like a man being baptized against his will. There are grand tales of men proving themselves through courage, vows, and feats of arms. Much less celebrated is the bravery required to wash before sunrise in a medieval winter. A young servant offers a small cake of soap made from lye and fat, smelling faintly of herbs and strongly of regret. You use it sparingly. Cleanliness exists here. Yes, but not in the soft, steaming abundance modern people have come to expect. Water must be hauled. Wood must be burned. Linens must be dried where they can, and no one is pouring hot baths for you before breakfast unless you happen to be a king, a bishop, or a feverish child whose grandmother knows how to bully the household. Even then, success is not guaranteed. Once you have done what can be done for your face and hands, you dry yourself on the linen, which has all the tenderness of a grain sack, and begin the slower business of dressing. This is no theatrical arming scene with trumpet flourishes and polished plates laid out like treasure. You're not putting on armour at all. Battle dress is for battle, tournaments, inspections, and those moments when one needs to impress people from a distance. Ordinary nightly life requires something both simpler and, in some ways, more annoying. First the linen shirt, cool and faintly stiff from washing, then the braise, then chausses drawn up and tied, then a tunic belted at the waist, and over it a heavier layer of wool that keeps out some of the morning and traps the rest against your skin. The wool is practical, respected, and determined to itch in places you cannot reach gracefully. A squire arrives carrying your outer garments folded over one arm, his expression solemn with the gravity that only very young men can summon while holding someone else's cloak. He helps settle the heavier surcoat across your shoulders and fastens a brooch at the throat. Your belt goes over this, carrying the useful signs of rank and adulthood, a knife, a pouch, perhaps gloves tucked through the leather. Not every object gleams. Most are worn, rubbed smooth by hands, weather, and years of use. That, more than brightness, suggests station. A knight is not expected to look fresh from a merchant's stall. He is expected to look as though his things have served him well and will continue to do so. Your boots, still damp from yesterday, are the worst part. They fight you in silence. At last they yield. You stamp once on the straw scattered by the wall and feel the stiffness settle around your feet. The squire kneels briefly to adjust a buckle, then rises and brushes invisible dust from your sleeve, because part of his duty is to make sure you look more composed than you feel. He has a narrow face and earnest eyes, and you suspect he's been awake longer than you. He smells faintly of lamp smoke. Ink darkens one finger where he must have carried a note for the steward before dawn. Boys in castles are forever running between stable, pantry, chamber, chapel, and hall, living half as servants and half as future ambitions. There is, hanging near the doorway, a little charm of a knotted thread and dried rosemary tucked beside a horseshoe nail. No one mentions it. No one removes it either. Some swear rosemary clears not just foul air but wicked influence. Others say iron near a threshold confuses wandering spirits, who are apparently less fearsome than forgetful. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such things are believed wholeheartedly or simply left in place, because no one wishes to become the fool who took them down just before a run of bad luck. Medieval caution is often disguised as piety, and piety occasionally borrows the habits of superstition with a perfectly straight face. From the chapel comes another sound now, quieter than the bell, the shifting rustle of people assembling. You make your way there across the ward, cloak drawn closer as a small wind curls along the wall. The suspicious dog from earlier trots behind you for part of the distance, then is turned away by a porter with a hissed insult and the sort of half-hearted kick that suggests long familiarity. It retreats only far enough to maintain its dignity. Inside the chapel the air is warmer, though only just. The warmth comes not from generosity of design, but from bodies, candles, and the fact that the place has less wind in it. Beeswax candles burn before the altar, and their scent mixes with cold stone, old incense, damp wool, and the faint dustiness of carved wood. The light trembles over painted saints whose faces look serene in the way of people who have never had to sleep above a kitchen. A narrow window admits grey morning through cloudy glass, enough to silver the edges of kneeling figures. You take your place among the household, a lord, if present, kneels more forward. A lady with fur at her collar lowers her head. 2 servants hover near the back, trying to appear both devout and invisible. A chaplain begins the office in a voice soft enough that everyone must lean inward to catch it. Latin folds through the chapel like smoke. You know parts of it well enough by repetition, and the rest carries on rhythm, posture, and borrowed faith. This, too, is part of nightly life when no one is trying to kill you. Prayer not as spectacle but as routine, as obligation, as a hedge against the world's great uncertainty. Your knees feel the cold through the cloth. The candle flames bend slightly whenever the door opens. Someone coughs, then tries to transform it into a pious throat clearing. A boy near the rear has plainly fallen half asleep standing up, his chin dipping toward his chest before he jerks awake again. The chaplain reads on. There is comfort in the repetition, even if the comfort is stern. Bells mark the hour, prayers mark the soul, and between them a person is meant to remain more or less upright. No one can quite agree whether nights are made more by war or by ritual. The songs prefer the first. Real life insists on the second. You're expected to hear Mass, to know when to bow your head, when to answer, when to stand, when to kneel, when to cross yourself. You're expected to look properly grave before the relic casket on the side altar, though privately you may have doubts about whether the tiny shard inside is truly from a saint's bone or from some enterprising abbey carpenter's offcut. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, and perhaps that is the best one can say of relics generally. Still, people kneel before them. Still, wax drips at their base. Still, men who would laugh at a weak lance stroke lower their eyes before a splinter in a silver box. When the prayers end, you remain for a moment longer than required. Not from dramatic holiness, but because the chapel offers a brief stillness before the hall begins its noise. A woman near the altar touches the hem of her veil to a carved image of the Virgin and then to her own forehead. A man beside the door mutters the name of St. Hubert, patron of hunters, though why he does so on a morning like this is not entirely clear. Perhaps he dreams of hawking later. Perhaps he merely wants favour stored in advance, like grain in a loft. Outside again, the yard seems brighter and less merciful. The hall doors stand open now, and from within comes the smell of smoke, warm bread, and pottage beginning its daily career of being ladled into bowls. Before joining the others, though, you duck into your chamber or the small room allotted to you off a passage where the walls hold the night's chill. Here a chest waits at the foot of the bed, iron-bound and reliable. On its lid lie the last things needed to make you presentable to the world: gloves, a cap, perhaps a mantle edged in fur if the household can support such luxuries without pretending too hard. The room is spare in the way noble rooms often are when stripped of story. A bed with ropes beneath a mattress stuffed more optimistically than evenly. Wool blankets, a stool, a peg for clothes, a little shuttered window letting in the pale day. On the table rests a candle burned halfway down from last night, its wax pooled and hardened like frozen cream. Beside it lies a comb of bone and tucked strangely near the wall. A small posy of dried lavender meant to sweeten the air. It does its best. You drag the comb through your hair and discover once again that medieval grooming is less about style than surrender. A beard may be trimmed, if fashion and means allow. Hair may be kept orderly enough to imply discipline. Beyond that, most men rely on hats, hoods, and the forgiving dimness of interiors. The romances never mention how much of aristocratic appearance depends on low light. At last you draw on your gloves, settle the cloak properly, and fasten your expression into something between wakefulness and authority. That is often enough. A knight at peace must appear composed even when chilled, respectful even when hungry, ready even when deeply uninterested in early devotion. You're a shape in layers of linen and wool, carrying obligation with whatever grace the morning permits. As you leave the chamber, you hear the dog outside again, giving one hopeful scratch at the hall threshold before being ignored by everyone. The half-burned candle, the cold water, the rosemary charm, the bell from before dawn, already the day has gathered its small familiar signs. You follow the smell of bread and smoke toward the rafters of the hall, where breakfast waits, along with all the rules and rumours that cling to it more stubbornly than steam. By the time you step into the hall, the castle has fully remembered itself. The long room is awake with smoke, heat, footsteps, and that particular murmur made by many people trying to begin a day without yet having the strength to be cheerful. Firelight glows from the great hearth at the centre, rising in a wavering column toward rafters blackened by years of soot and winter dinners. The smell is rich and layered oat pottage, coarse bread, damp wool steaming as people thaw, a little ale, a little onion, a little old ash. Rushes lie strewn across the floor, their freshness more aspirational than factual, and the trestle tables stand in ordered ranks beneath the hanging shadows. Breakfast, despite what later imagination may suggest, is not a heroic feast of groaning boards and roasted marvels. It is practical, warm if fortune smiles, and meant to set a body upright rather than impress it. You take your place among the household, not at the highest end of the hall, perhaps, but well enough situated to receive a trencher before the lesser men, and well enough seen to remember your back should remain straight. Rank is one of those invisible furnishings in a medieval hall. No one needs to point at it. Everyone keeps bumping into it anyway. A servant comes with bread, dark and coarse, cut from a loaf that could probably stop a small argument if thrown correctly. Another sets down a bowl of pottage thick with oats and leeks, with perhaps a hint of onion and whatever mercy the kitchen found in its stores before dawn. If the season is kind, there may be a little cheese. If the steward has recently decided to display competence, there may even be smoked fish set out in slices thin enough to imply discipline rather than generosity. You are handed a cup of weak ale, because water, while common enough, often travels to the table with fewer guarantees than anyone finds comforting. Medieval hydration is a system built largely on caution and fermentation. You sit, wrap your hands around the bowl, and let the heat reach your fingers. That first small comfort of the day matters more than any trumpet flourish ever could. Around you benches creak as men settle. A squire farther down the table tries to eat with knightly restraint and instead drips pottage on his sleeve. A woman carrying trenchers pauses to rebuke him without breaking stride. Near the far wall, 2 hounds lie in patient misery, staring at the room with the concentrated sorrow of creatures convinced they are being starved by saints for theological reasons. The lord of the place, or his steward if the lord keeps his chamber longer, occupies the more important space nearer the dais. There, dishes are somewhat better, cloth somewhat cleaner, and conversation pitched with the sort of care that indicates both status and the presence of ears worth impressing. Here below, the talk is freer, though never entirely careless. One does not forget oneself in a hall. One only relaxes into one's proper level of caution. You tear bread, dip it into the pottage, and listen. A night at breakfast does nearly as much listening as eating. News arrives here before it becomes official, and rumour arrives before news has even saddled a horse. Someone mentions that the bridge near the lower mill is still soft from rain, and likely to need timber. Someone else swears that a peddler coming up the road yesterday carried pilgrim badges from 3 different shrines and claimed each had been blessed by hands no 2 witnesses described the same way. A third man, older and sourer, insists that the reeve in the next manor is shaving measures from the grain rents again, and will one day be found floating in a ditch with a face full of divine surprise. Across from you sits a fellow knight whose beard has collected enough crumbs to suggest either absent-mindedness or a radical new understanding of storage. He dips his head in greeting and remarks that the frost held harder in the north field than expected. This is the sort of sentence knightly life contains in abundance when nobody is charging anyone. Frost, fields, rents, fodder, roofs, roads, rents again. Battle is dramatic, certainly, but peace has paperwork, mud, and a permanent interest in whether barley will sulk this season. At the next table, a pair of pages whisper over a wooden practice sword hidden partly beneath the bench. One is boasting softly about a future tournament in which he intends, through means not yet clear, to become famous without first becoming bruised. The other nods with the patient scepticism of someone who has already been knocked flat twice this week. Their voices weave in and out of the heavier talk of men discussing tenants, timber, and the quality of the last shipment of salt fish. Castles are full of overlapping worlds like their ambition below adulthood, duty above appetite, and everyone sharing the same smoke. A servant brings a small dish of honey to the upper end of the table. It does not travel as far as your place. This is not a tragedy. It is hierarchy in edible form. You drink the ale and feel a little life return. Around the hearth, cloaks steam gently. One man removes his gloves and stretches his fingers toward the fire with the grave expression of a soul being restored after partial freezing. Another has taken it upon himself to complain about the dampness of the hall, the dampness of the stables, the dampness of his bed, and the general conspiracy of moisture against men of standing. This draws from someone nearby the dry observation that God made England or France, or wherever your sleepy medieval world has decided to settle for fish, monks, and mildew, and men merely rent space in it. A few quiet laughs answer that. Nothing too lively. The morning is not ready for merriment yet. At the dais, an ink-stained scribe confers with the steward over a wax tablet and a folded strip of parchment. Even from here you can tell which man serves figures and which serves appearances. The scribe has a face like a fasting candle, and fingers darkened at the nails. The steward wears authority as though it were a fur collar. They bend over whatever problem the day has already produced: missing hens, delayed rents, a message from a neighbouring lord, the price of oats, a complaint from villagers about pigs in the churchyard, which sounds comic until one recalls it will probably require 3 meetings and a fine. No one can quite agree whether a knight's authority begins at his sword belt or at his seat in the hall. Some say men obey steel, others know perfectly well they obey bread, order, memory, and the visible arrangement of who sits where when the trenchers come out. A hall teaches obedience quietly. The high table receives better cuts, the lower tables louder benches, and the servants pass according to a map everyone has learned since childhood. A priest or chaplain moves through briefly, taking a little bread, offering a nod here and there, and accepting murmured courtesies. One of the older women by the side wall touches the little pewter badge pinned at her dress, a pilgrim token from some shrine visited years before, perhaps after a fever, perhaps after a vow. Some swear such badges protect the wearer on roads and in childbirth, and occasionally against dishonest merchants, though that last promise may ask a bit much of any saint. Still, people wear them, rub them, trust them in the way humans trust small metal things when the world remains large and unpredictable. The suspicious dog has made it into the hall at last. No one saw the exact moment of entry, which is how professionals operate. It now sits with exaggerated innocence near the buttery door, ears alert, tail tucked neatly around its feet, presenting itself as a modest witness to human excess. A scullion slips it a crust when she thinks no one notices. Everyone notices. No one objects. Castles run partly on custom, partly on labour, and partly on unofficial arrangements with dogs. You finish the pottage slowly, scraping the bowl with the last of the bread. The warmth settles into you. The hall's noise grows steadier as people wake more fully. A messenger enters, boots muddy to the knee, and bows near the dais before being waved toward food first and questions second. Sensible rule. Even urgent news sounds better once fed. At another table a man begins describing, for the third time, how he once saw a horse shy at a roadside corpse candle, those pale wandering lights some peasants take for spirits or warnings. Some swear they mark buried treasure. Others say they lead travellers into bogs. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, though they always agree they saw them themselves, usually after dark and usually after ale. By now the room has shifted from waking into working. Trencher boards are cleared, cups refilled or not. Benches scrape as men rise by rank and necessity. A knight's morning meal does not end with leisure stretching before him. It ends with expectation. Somewhere outside the yard waits. Horses will need exercising. Practice weapons will be stacked already in the courtyard. Squires will be pretending not to be nervous. The air will still be cold enough to bite. And someone will certainly suggest drills as though this were a pleasure devised by thoughtful people. You rise, pulling your cloak straighter across your shoulders. The crumbs are brushed away. A servant takes the bowl. The steward glances through the hall and catches your eye for half a second, enough to remind you that the day is being watched from all directions. Near the hearth, the dog has curled into itself and gone half asleep as if it, unlike the rest of you, has mastered the proper use of a castle morning. You step back toward the doors under the soot-black rafters, carrying with you the taste of ale and oats, the hum of rumour, and the low, steady knowledge that being a knight, when not in battle, involved a great many bowls, benches, and conversations before anyone ever reaches for a sword. When you step out from the hall, the air meets you like a wet glove. Breakfast has done its kind, limited work, but the cold is still in the stones and in the pale sky above the courtyard, where the morning seems to hover without ever fully deciding to brighten. The yard lies busy before you, ringed by walls the colour of old bone, with ladders propped near the armoury shed, and a row of practice posts standing in the churned earth like patient, unfortunate saints. The smell here is different from the hall less smoke, more mud, leather, horse, and the sharp iron tang that lingers anywhere men insist on preparing for danger while mostly at peace. This is where the songs would prefer to begin. They would like a trumpet, sunlight flashing on polished mail, and a few deeply impressed maidens at a window. What you get instead is a squire struggling to drag a bundle of lances across the yard, while trying not to look as though the lances are winning. Training, when no war is pressing at the gate, is not one grand thing but many smaller ones, repeated until they become part of the body's private memory. You do not train only to strike a man from horseback or split a shield in two. You train to sit well in the saddle for hours, to mount without looking clumsy, to keep your shoulders level under fatigue, to turn neatly in a crowded yard, to hold a shield without wasting strength, to command your horse with knees and weight instead of hauling at its mouth like a fisherman in a panic. A knight's reputation is built as much on how he moves in ordinary moments as on what he does in extraordinary ones. Already a few others are gathered in the yardmen of standing in layered wool and riding boots, squires with flushed faces, pages carrying wooden wasters, a master-at-arms whose entire expression suggests that disappointment is the natural state of mankind. He is broad across the shoulders, greying at the beard, and wrapped in a cloak that has outlived several fashions and perhaps one minor siege. In one hand he carries a staff for pointing, correcting, or, when necessary, tapping a boy smartly across the shin for crimes against footwork. You cross the yard toward him, your boots sinking slightly where the earth has been chewed by rain and hooves. Near the wall, bundles of blunted practice swords lean against a bench. Shields rest beside them, leather-faced and scarred from use. A wooden quintin stands farther off, one arm fitted with a small target board and the other weighted so that a poor strike makes it whip around and box the rider on the back of the head. It is an educational machine, and rather a smug one. The master-at-arms nods as you approach, then wastes no time on poetry. One of the squires is sent to fetch helms for mounted drill. Another is corrected for slouching before he has even touched a weapon. You're assigned first to sword practice on foot, because even the mounted knight spends much of his life unhorsed, and because discipline begins where excuses end. A wooden waster is placed in your hand. Its balance is clumsy compared with good steel, but it serves nearby. Someone buckles on a padded jack. Someone else complains quietly that his shoulder still aches from yesterday. The master-at-arms hears him at once and informs him that pain is God's way of proving he still has a shoulder. Pairs begin to form. The yard fills with the dry crack of wood on wood, boots shifting in mud, breath forced out through clenched teeth. You square up opposite another knight, both of you more awake now than anyone had a right to be an hour ago. The drill is not a wild exchange. It is measured cut, ward, step, recover, again. The emphasis falls on line, timing, and keeping your balance despite the ground's desire to embarrass you. The master-at-arms prowls among you like a winter wolf in boots, correcting elbows, turning wrists, shoving shoulders back where vanity has let them drift forward. He reminds you, and everyone within earshot, that a knight must not look hurried. That matters. The point is not merely to prevail in violence, but to appear composed within effort. Grace is a weapon of its own in a world obsessed with rank. Men are always being watched here by lords, by servants, by rival households, by squires deciding whom to admire, by women at windows deciding whom to laugh at. Even when nobody says so, every movement enters the long memory of a castle. This is why training is never just about fighting. It is about posture, reputation, and control. A man who flails in practice will be assumed to flail in judgment. A man who drops his shield may later find his opinions strangely lighter in the manor court. Knighthood is theatre with bruises. The lines are spoken in leather and wool. The audience is everyone, and forgetting your part can follow you for years. You circle, strike, block, shift your footing, and feel the body remember what breakfast had nearly softened. The cold leaves you by degrees. Heat rises under the layers of wool. Your gloves grow damp at the palms. Across the yard, one of the pages takes a blow to the helmet from a waster and sits down abruptly in the mud, looking less injured than deeply betrayed. His companions try not to laugh until the master-at-arms turns away, at which point their restraint collapses entirely. The fallen boy rises with as much dignity as mud permits, which is to say, not much. A servant comes through carrying a bucket of sand to sprinkle over the worst of the slick ground. Another gathers dropped practice daggers from beside a fence. The work of training is always surrounded by the smaller work that keeps it possible. Someone mends straps. Someone sweeps. Someone fetches water. Nobility may be the visible part of the machine, but the machine itself runs on hands no minstrel bothers to rhyme. After the sword drill comes shield work. Your arm begins to feel the weight quickly, which is part of the lesson. A shield does not become heavy only in battle. It becomes heavy every time it is lifted and held properly, while a master-at-arms tells you, with great fairness and no sympathy, that your guard is drifting. You brace, step, answer the strike, and remember not to overreach. Nearby, a knight younger than you takes an enthusiastic swing wide enough to expose his side completely. The correction he receives is so sharp and public that even the suspicious dog, who has somehow arrived at the gate of the yard, seems to wince. No one can quite agree whether the best knights are made by hard masters or humiliating mornings. Some swear a man improves most after public embarrassment. Others maintain he merely learns to hate witnesses. The truth is probably both. At last the mounted drill begins. This is where the stable work of earlier hours meets the higher business of display. Horses are led in, snorting steam into the cold. Saddles creak, bits ring. Leather straps are checked once more. You mount with practiced ease, not because it is always graceful, but because you have done it often enough to hide the difficulty. A knight who climbs like a sack of onions does not inspire much confidence, however noble his grandfather. You guide your horse into line with the others. The animal beneath you is restless with morning energy, ears flicking, neck warm under your glove. Mounted training is a partnership, though not an equal one. You're expected to understand temperament, pace, and pressure. A horse must trust the hand on the rein and the leg at its side. Too rough, and you look foolish. Too soft, and you also look foolish, only more slowly. The first exercise is simple enough controlled passes across the yard, turning cleanly at the far end, keeping your seat quiet. Then come lance drills with blunted shafts, aimed at rings hung from a beam and at the target of the quintin. The point is not only accuracy, it is rhythm. Approach straight. Lower the lance without theatrical wobbling. Strike true. Recover. Do not let the weighted arm of the quintin swat you like an offended aunt. One of the squires, eager beyond wisdom, charges too close and glances his hit. The quintin swings round and catches him hard across the shoulder, nearly pitching him from the saddle. He clings on with both knees and an expression of religious revelation. Even the master-at-arms allows himself one thin smile. Medieval education has many methods, and several of them are built from wood. You take your own turn and feel the world narrow to horse, target, breath. Hooves drum the yard, mud flicks back, the lance dips, strikes, and for a satisfying instant everything aligns the pass clean. The target answered, the recovery neat. That small perfection matters more than anyone outside this world would guess. A knight may not fight for months, even years, but he must remain ready in body and appearance, as though battle could be summoned by weather, rumour, or a sealed letter arriving at the wrong hour. By the time the drills ease, the sun has managed at last to turn the upper stones pale gold, though the warmth does not descend with it. Men breathe hard, horses are walked out, pages collect scattered gear. The master-at-arms gives final corrections that sound suspiciously like insults and are accepted as gifts. You dismount, hand the reins to a groom, and roll one shoulder where the shield has left its memory. Training done, the yard begins to loosen. Conversation returns. Someone boasts softly. Someone else denies having slipped, despite the evidence still attached to his boot. From a window above, laughter flickers and vanishes. Reputation has been fed for another day. So has humility. And as you stand there in the churned earth, with wood dust on your glove and horse steam drifting in the cold, you begin to understand that a night out of battle is never entirely at rest. Even in peace, the body is being taught, corrected, displayed, and measured by masters, by watchers, by horses, and by the stubborn old stones of the yard itself. When the last of the mounted drills loosens into ordinary movement, and the yard begins to empty of its harsher energies, you find yourself following the reins, the steam, and the noise back toward the stables. This is the part no minstrel ever lingers on unless he has lost a wager. Yet here, among the stalls and tack hooks and muddy thresholds, much of a knight's true life quietly unfolds, not in the clash of banners, but in the care of animals, the judgment of leather, the listening to men who smell of hay and know more than they say. The stable yard is busier now than it was before dawn, and somehow warmer for it, though the warmth is mostly borrowed from horseflesh and work. Grooms lead sweating mounts in slow circles to cool them properly. A boy with chapped hands carries armfuls of clean straw into a side stall. Another stands on a low stool, trying to reach a harness peg while the harness itself sways, like a patient beast unwilling to cooperate. The chestnut you rode is led in, ears flicking, side still darkened with exertion. You put a hand against its neck and feel the living heat through the short winter coat. The horse blows once, as if offering its opinion on the morning, which is not flattering. A knight who neglects horses may still impress a poet. He will not impress a groom. You walk with the animal into the stable, ducking beneath the low lintel darkened by years of smoke and touch. Inside, the familiar smells close around you at once hay, dung, damp leather, oats, lanolin, hoof oil, the sweet dusty scent of old timber, and underneath it all that powerful grassy warmth of horses themselves. Sunlight threads through gaps in the boards and falls in slanting bars across the floor, catching dust motes that drift like lazy incense. Somewhere farther in, a horse stamps and rattles a halter ring. Somewhere else, a stable lad is being corrected in tones so resigned they suggest this has happened every day since creation. You hand over the reins to a groom whose face could have been carved from seasoned oak. He checks the bit, runs his hand along the horse's shoulder, and gives one brief nod that is somehow both respectful and quietly evaluative. Men like him speak to knights with proper courtesy, but not with much awe. They have seen too many noble riders bounce by bad temper, bad seat, bad weather, or simple overconfidence. They know which men ride lightly, which soar at the mouth, which notice a stone in the hoof before it becomes trouble, and which would ride straight into a ditch if their horse did not possess stronger convictions. The saddle comes off. The horse's back steams faintly in the cool air. A stable boy begins rubbing the coat down with straw in quick practice strokes, then with a cloth, working from neck to flank. The animal leans into it with scandalous pleasure. One of the older grooms says that horses love comfort more honestly than Christians do, and no one disputes him. Nearby, another man lifts a hoof to check for packed mud or stones. He works with a matter-of-fact patience of someone whose hands have spent years near iron shoes and heavy opinions. You remain a while, not because you're expected to do the whole work yourself, but because presence matters. It always does. A knight should know the names of his horses, their habits, their old injuries, the slight hitch one gets in wet weather, the other's tendency to shy at fluttering cloth, the mare who bites only men who deserve it, and the gelding who seems harmless until saddled by fools. This knowledge is practical, but it is also social. It marks you as competent. It tells the men below you that you see more than your own rank. In the next stall, a bay destrier, massive, dark, and unreasonably proud, turns his head to watch everything with the air of a minor lord checking the guest list. He belongs perhaps to the household's master, or to some wealthier knight than you, and his harness is finer, with brass fittings polished to a dull glow. War horses are expensive in ways peasants can hardly imagine. Their feed, their tack, their training, their value in battle and display, each one is part weapon, part status symbol, part glutton. Some swear a good destrier can remember insults. Others insist they only remember where the grain is kept. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, though everyone agrees they are trouble when bored. You drift farther into the stable and past the tack room, where bridles, girths, saddle cloths, breast straps, reins, and lead ropes hang from pegs like the cast-off skins of orderly beasts. The leather smell is stronger here, rich and oily, mixed with the beeswax used on straps and the sharper note of iron buckles. A young man sits on a stool with an awl and thread, mending a cracked strap. He looks up only briefly before returning to the work. Such repairs are endless. Buckles fail. Stitching loosens. Rain swells leather. Cold stiffens it. Every ride writes its small damage into the gear, and someone must read it before disaster does. On a shelf sits a little crock of salve for saddle sores on horses, not knights, though perhaps both would benefit. Beside it are bunches of dried herbs hanging from a beam, comfrey, perhaps, and yarrow, and something bitter you do not recognize. Medieval horse care lives in the same uneasy marriage of experience, folk knowledge, and hopeful superstition as the care of people. A poultice here, warm mash there, rest if possible, bleeding if someone old and convinced insists upon it. Leeches are not only for men of rank and bad humours, animals too may suffer under the confident hands of tradition. One of the grooms spits thoughtfully into the straw and tells another that old Martin from the lower village swears by hanging a wolf's tooth in the stable to ward off sickness among the horses. The other says Martin also swears cheese cures nightmares and should not be consulted on matters requiring reason. Still, you notice a little charm of plaited rushes and red thread tied near a stall partition, and no one has cut it down. Even practical men leave room for luck. Beyond the stable proper lies the kennel yard, and after a while you wander there, drawn by the rising clamour. If the stables belong to strength and dignity, the kennels belong to hunger, enthusiasm, and a complete collapse of personal boundaries. Hounds leap against the fencing, tails lashing, muzzles pale with excitement. A kennel master strides among them armed with scraps, curses, and the authority of a man who has been barked at for decades without losing either his hearing or his temper. The dogs know him, if not reverently, then at least with professional respect. These are not pampered lap creatures warming noble laps beside tapestries. These are working animals hunting hounds, lean-bodied and sharp-nosed, built for speed, stamina, and the singular joy of chasing things that would rather not be chased. Their ears flap, their paws scratch, their eyes shine with the terrible optimism of beasts who believe every moment may become a hunt. You stand near the gate and one of them presses its long nose through the slats to inspect your glove with absolute seriousness. Another gives a bark so sudden it nearly startles your soul out through your ear. The kennel master nods to you and continues sorting the dogs, checking paws, shoulders, teeth, and tempers. Dogs, like horses, have ranks and reputations. Some are valued for nose, some for courage, some for stubbornness that somehow counts as virtue when aimed in the correct direction. There are remedies for them, 2 herbal washes, bits of fat mixed with ground plants, odd salves that smell like a monastery garden argued with a butcher's stall. Some swear a touch of St. Hubert's blessing helps a hound keep true on the scent. Others prefer training, which is less poetic but usually faster. You lean on the fence and watch. A page enters carrying a bucket and is instantly adored by every dog in Christendom. He vanishes under a storm of paws and ears. The kennel master rescues him with old efficiency and remarks that if pages were as easy to train as hounds, half the kingdom's troubles would evaporate. It is not a bad line. You store it away, though in this world wit is best used gently, like salt. Near the edge of the yard, under a lean-to roof, falconry gear hangs in careful order: jesses, gloves, hoods, perches. Not every night hawks, and not every household can afford the full elegance of it. But birds of prey move through the same world of noble leisure and discipline as horses and hounds. Even now you can imagine some hawk perched later on a leather glove, hooded and silent, like a tiny nobleman refusing conversation. Hunting animals are as much part of status as they are of sport. To keep them well is to declare that your household has means, order, and time enough for pursuits beyond mere survival. Still, beneath all this display lies labour, real labour. Men carrying feed, boys hauling muck, women from the kitchen sending scraps, blacksmiths fitting shoes, harness repaired, worming mixtures prepared, water drawn and drawn again. A knight's life depends on systems of care so constant they become invisible unless you stop and look. The animals are splendid only because so many tired hands keep them so. No one can quite agree whether a castle is held together more by stone or by habit. Standing here between the stables and kennels, you begin to suspect the answer is habit with manure on its boots. At last, the noise settles into something almost soothing: hooves shifting in straw, dogs whining, leather creaking, men exchanging brief practical words. The suspicious dog from the hall appears once again, now sitting just beyond the kennel gate as though waiting to be consulted on matters of policy. It has no collar, no clear owner, and entirely too much confidence. One of the stable boys tosses it a bone end. It catches the offering with silent expertise and retreats beneath a cart. Victorious. You linger a moment longer, breathing in the mingled scents of hay and hound and horse, while somewhere outside the bells mark another small division of the day. Soon you will leave the warmth of animals and ride out beyond the keep, past hedges and fields and winter stores, to see the lands that support all this stone and ceremony. But for now, in the stable dark, among tack and straw, and the patient knowledge of working men, knighthood feels less like glory than stewardship: muddy, expensive, breathing and very much alive. By the time you leave the stable yard behind, the day has climbed into that pale middle stretch of morning when the cold no longer feels theatrical and simply settles into its work. The keep stands at your back in a crown of stone and smoke, its walls brightened a little by the thin sun, though not enough to look friendly. Ahead lies the manor land, which is less romantic than the songs suggest and far more important. A knight may sleep inside walls and eat beneath rafters, but his life is tied to what spreads beyond them: fields, lanes, hedges, mills, sheep runs, winter storehouses, tenant plots, muddy bridges, and all the small stubborn corners of land where rent is borne one sack, one hen, one complaint at a time. Your horse is brought out saddled and calmer now, the earlier edge worked out of it by training. You mount in the yard with only the minimum amount of creaking and settle your cloak against the wind. A groom adjusts the girth once more, pats the horse's shoulder, and steps back. One of the younger squires is coming with you, along with a mounted servant and a reeves man who knows the fields more intimately than any noble ever will. He has a narrow cap pulled low, mud already dried on his boots, and the expression of someone prepared to discuss drainage longer than anyone else wants to hear about it. The gate opens by degrees. Oak doors, iron bands, chain, timber, the old patient business of letting the world in and out. You pass under the shadow of the gatehouse, where the smell of damp wood and old straw lingers in the stone throat of the passage, and then you are on the road below the keep with the morning widening around you. At once the world changes. Inside the walls, everything is contained, echoing, layered, human. Outside, the air opens and carries smells from farther off wet earth, wood smoke from cottages, dung from the road, the faint mineral scent of the river, and somewhere beyond all that, the cold, clean note of open fields. Frost still clings in silver patches along the edges of ruts, where cartwheels have hardened yesterday's mud into ridges like baked clay. Hedges run beside the lane, leafless and tangled, sparrows bursting from them in little panicked councils. A crow watches from a post with the intense seriousness of a clerk who distrusts everyone. This ride is not a grand excursion. You're not setting out beneath banners while horns answer from the hills. You're going to inspect boundaries, speak to men, glance at damage, hear worries, and let the manor know that authority still moves through it on horseback. That matters. Power in this world is not only written in charters or announced in halls. It is seen on roads, at mill doors, beside flooded ditches, outside barns with broken latches. A knight who never leaves the keep risks becoming a rumour in his own fields. The village comes first, huddled just below the rise. Low cottages crouch beneath thatch darkened by damp, smoke escaping through roof vents and gaps with all the discipline of geese. Pigs nose around a midden heap with deep moral conviction. A woman in a wool kirtle stoops at a doorway to shake out rushes onto the lane. A child stands barefoot on a threshold despite the cold, because medieval childhood is largely an argument with common sense. When they see you riding through, heads turn. Caps are touched. A few bow. Most simply look, quick and measuring. Respect here is real, but it is mixed with memory. These people know which lord exacted more than he should. Which knight rode past a flooded lane without sending help? Which household sent alms in a hard winter, and which sent only lectures? You do not stop long, though the reeves man leans in his saddle to mention that 2 cottages near the lower ditch may need timber before the rains deepen again. He says it in the calm tone of someone describing weather, but you hear the calculation beneath it. Timber costs. Delay costs too. A peasant roof never waits politely for convenience. At the edge of the village stands a roadside shrine set into a little niche of stone under a crude wooden cover. Inside is a painted saint, face faded by weather and smoke, with a few old wax drippings hard around the base. Someone has tucked dried herbs there, and a little scrap of blue cloth tied to the beam above stirs in the breeze. Some swear that travellers who touch the shrine before market avoid dishonest weighing scales. Others say the shrine chiefly protects them from feeling entirely alone on the road. You incline your head as you pass. In this world, courtesy towards saints is cheap insurance. The lane bends toward the fields. Here the real body of the manor opens itself long strips of ploughed land lying in ordered bands. some dark and bare, some green with winter grain, some resting. Oxen move in the distance like patient brown thoughts. Men bend at work, and from this far they seem almost part of the furrows. The open field system has a kind of rough geometry to it, strips shared, rights tangled, custom running older than anyone living. No one can quite agree whether such arrangements were designed wisely or merely inherited stubbornly, but they hold because too many lives depend on pretending they are natural. Your horse picks carefully along the edge of a wetter patch, while the Reeves man points out where one boundary ditch has softened. Boundary matters sound dull until you realize how often they end in shouting, fines, or someone moving a marker stone in the night and swearing by all the saints it was always there. Land remembers everything, and people remember land with dangerous creativity. You ride onto the mill by the stream, a low building hunched beside turning water. Even before you see it fully, you hear it, the clack and groan of wheel and timber, the steady grinding that sounds almost human when heard from a distance. The mill is one of the manor's beating hearts. Grain comes here, and with it obligation. Tenants grind under lordly right, and the miller, by universal custom, is suspected by almost everyone of keeping more than his fair share. This may be unjust. It may also be accurate. The miller emerges wiping flour from his hands onto an apron that surrendered dignity years ago. He bows enough to remain safe, but not enough to spill his annoyance. There has been some trouble with the small bridge just beyond, he says, gesturing with a chin white as snowfall. One support beam has softened, and a cartwheel nearly went through yesterday. He says this in the hearing of your companions so that the information becomes public fact rather than private warning. Very sensible. Medieval administration often depends on making sure the correct number of ears have heard a thing. You dismount to look. The bridge is modest, more stout planks and hope than engineering, spanning a stretch of stream that glitters beneath alder branches. One side sags a little. The wood near the bank is dark with rot. This is precisely the kind of matter that fills a knight's ordinary life, not glorious, not sung. Yet if it is ignored, grain carts are delayed, tempers sour, the mill complains, the tenants mutter, and before long your steward is holding a wax tablet while everyone explains why this should have been handled sooner. You crouch, press the timber with your glove, and feel it give just enough to be insulting. The Reeves man nods gravely, pleased perhaps that the bridge has justified his existence. The squire watches with the alert expression of someone hoping there may be a lesson here that does not involve carrying timber himself. You tell them it must be mended before market day. This is not a dramatic order, but it lands with the weight of structure. A knight, in peace, speaks often in practical imperatives. From the mill you ride toward the barn enclosures and winter storehouses, where grain sacks are stacked under cover, and peasants move like careful ants carrying feed, tools, armfuls of kindling. A flock of geese patrols one yard with the self-righteousness of church officials. Near another barn, two women are spreading flax, their fingers red with cold, while an old man patches a hurdle with willow rods. The daily life of the manor never fully pauses. It bends with season, feast, frost, and harvest, but it always continues mending, storing, threshing, hauling, watching the sky. You stop at one granary where the lock on the oak door has been recently replaced. Iron keys matter here. Locks matter. Stores must be guarded not only against thieves but against hunger itself. A thin winter can make a strong door feel like theology. The mounted servant with you exchanges a few words with the keeper, who complains of mice, damp, and the scandalous appetite of labourers. There are always complaints. A manor without complaints would be considered suspicious, perhaps enchanted. Farther out, you cross pasture where sheep crop the short grass and stare as though everyone else has made a poor choice. The wind is stronger here. It carries the smell of wool and distant wood smoke and the faint ringing of bells from the monastery beyond the far ridge. Those bells reach everywhere. It seems over hall and yard, over barns and flooded ruts, over men who can read and men who cannot, reminding everyone that time belongs at least partly to prayer whether they like it or not. At a field boundary marked by an old stone half buried in earth, the Reeves man pauses to tell a story in the casual way people tell stories they absolutely believe while pretending not to. Some swear, he says, that on winter nights the boundary stones move if the dead are restless, and that a man who swears falsely upon one will lose his way in a daylight the next day, as if the land itself rejects him. Even now it is hard to tell whether he means this as warning, folklore, or entertainment for the squire, perhaps all three. Medieval land is never just land, it is custom, memory, law, fear, inheritance, and legend braided together so tightly no one can sort them apart. By now the road turns back toward the keep, though not directly. You pass a coppiced wood where cut stumps stand pale and raw, and where bundles of gathered sticks wait near a cart. Fuel is as much a concern as grain. Fire keeps halls habitable, bread baked, ale brewed, candles lit, bath water imagined. Without wood, stone becomes a punishment. A forester's boy raises a hand as you pass, face pinched by the cold. And one of the hounds from the kennels brought along for exercise and now regretting every puddle, sniffs at leaves with exhausted professionalism. The keep appears again at last on its rise, watchful and square against the whitening sky. From out here it looks less like a home and more like what it truly is, a knot tying together land, labour and authority. The fields feed it, the rents sustain it, the people endure it, serve it, appeal to it, resent it, and look to it all at once. And as you ride back along the muddy lane, passing the shrine, the village, the sagging bridge already turning in your mind into orders and timber and labour owed, you understand more clearly that a knight away from battle is not merely a warrior waiting to be useful. He is part overseer, part landlord's hand, part road watcher, part visible reminder that the manor is meant to hold. The sword at his side matters, yes, but so do the ditches, the grain, the roofs, and the bridge that must not fail before market day. By the time you return to the keep, the road has printed itself into your boots, and the smell of wet earth has climbed into your cloak as though it intends to live there permanently. The gatehouse swallows you again with its damp stone throat, and the familiar sounds of the inner ward rise to meet you, iron striking iron somewhere near the smithy, voices crossing in the cold, a horse stamping in impatience, a pail set down too hard. Yet you do not go to the hall for ease, nor to the hearth for comfort. The morning's ride has only changed the kind of work waiting for you. Outside the walls you've looked at the manor. Inside them, the manor is now about to speak back. The manor court is not held in some grand chamber of glittering justice. It usually gathers where space allows and authority can be seen, perhaps in a lower hall, a chamber off the main room, or under a covered passage if the weather permits and no one wishes to freeze with dignity in public. Today it sits in a side room near the hall, oak-doored and draughty, with benches along the wall, a table set for records, and rushes on the floor trying bravely to disguise the damp. A narrow window lets in a thin strip of light. more useful for proving the day exists than for illumination. Beeswax is expensive, so the candles are few. Justice, like breakfast, is expected to make do. You enter with the others, and at once the room arranges itself around rank. The steward is already there with his wax tablets and that expression of permanent administrative disappointment which seems to be issued to his kind at birth. Beside him sits the scribe from breakfast. The same ink-stained figure with darkened fingers and a face like folded parchment. His quills are trimmed. His knife lies ready for scraping mistakes. A little pot of ink waits at his elbow, and next to it a folded parchment for matters important enough to survive the day. Lesser complaints may live and die on wax. Greater ones graduate into writing. A reeve stands near the table, cap in hand. 2 villagers wait on the bench, one clutching the other's sleeve as if afraid the matter might wander off without witness. A miller loiters by the door with the wary patience of a man accustomed to being blamed professionally. Behind them are 3 others, then 2 more, and perhaps someone's wife who is not officially part of the business, but is very clearly not going to leave until it is handled properly. Medieval administration rests on many pillars. One of them is the refusal of determined women to be sent away unheard. You take your place, neither too central nor too casual, aware that your presence matters even when you do not speak first. The manor court is where lordship becomes visible in its most ordinary clothing. Here there are no banners, no heroic gestures, only rents, fines, oaths, boundary quarrels, broken hedges, unpaid labour, straying animals, market tolls, and the mysterious ability of several unrelated men to insist a pig open the gate itself. The first matter concerns a strip of ploughland near the lower field. One tenant claims his neighbour shifted the boundary marker by half a furrow during the last heavy rain. The neighbour claims the furrow has always lain where it does now, and that only a fool or a liar would say otherwise. Both are willing to swear to this before God, the steward, and anyone else with sufficient leisure. The reeve looks already tired of their existence. The scribe scratches notes. The steward asks questions in the flat tone of a man who has heard the whole human story, condensed into complaints about dirt. How long ago was the marker seen? Who observed it? Was anyone there after Vespers? Why was the reeve not called sooner? Did the rain move it? Or did hands? The 2 men answer with that peculiar earnestness produced by high stakes and low acreage. To them, half a furrow is not trivial. It may mean grain lost, labour wasted, hunger stretched thinner. Tiny injustices become large very quickly when measured against winter. No one can quite agree whether land disputes are about property or memory. Each man speaks as though the earth itself once confided privately in him. One gestures so passionately, you begin to fear he may strike the table and spill the ink, which would certainly become a worse offence than moving a stone. At last the steward orders the matter inspected in person, at first dry opportunity, with witnesses. Until then the old arrangement is to hold. Both men bow, neither content, both satisfied enough not to scream, which in manor court terms counts as progress. The next complaint is easier to understand and no easier to solve. A widow from the village has come because her neighbour's geese has been feeding in her small cabbage patch, ruining what remained after the frost. The accused neighbour, a man with shoulders like cart yokes and the baffled look of someone dragged into a theological debate against his will, insists geese go where they please and cannot be reasoned with. This is probably the truest statement spoken all day, but it does not help him. The widow speaks with calm precision and names the number of heads spoiled, the day it happened, and the fact that this is the 3rd time. The geese, absent but spiritually present, are clearly hardened offenders. A fine is proposed, the man objects, the widow objects to his objection. Someone in the back mutters that the geese are better managed than their owner. Even you nearly smile. The steward does not. He settles the matter with a small compensation in grain, and a warning that the birds be kept out or the next payment will be heavier. The widow nods, victorious but not triumphant. The man bows with the compressed misery of one robbed by his own poultry. Then comes tolls. They always come. A merchant passing through the lower lane claims he paid twice at market 3 days ago, once at the bridge and once in the square. The keeper at the bridge says the payment there was lawful. The market man says the second charge must therefore also have been lawful, because he collected it. Both cannot be right unless the system has become unusually creative. The merchant produces a tally stick and an offended expression. The steward inspects the marks. The scribe looks interested for the first time all morning. You listen as the details unravel. It appears the bridge keeper took a road toll on carts and pack animals, while the market man, either confused or bold, demanded entry due as though the merchant were setting up a stall, which he was not. The merchant wants silver back. The market man wants not to look dishonest. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether most corruption begins in greed or in people hoping no one understands the rules well enough to argue. In this case, it scarcely matters. The market man is rebuked. The merchant is promised correction. Somewhere in the room, order limps back to its feet. The court continues in this manner, each little matter carrying more weight than its size first suggests. A broken cart wheel has blocked part of the lane near the mill, and who should remove it is now, inexplicably, a moral question. A tenant owes labour service but claims illness, producing as evidence a face of such tragic sincerity that it would move a saint. Unfortunately for him, his brother was seen carrying ale with him at dusk 2 nights ago. Illness may be real. So may thirst. The steward assigns him lighter work and a warning, which feels both stern and oddly merciful. A woman asks leave to glean fallen grain after threshing as her mother did before her. A young man is accused of taking fish from the Lord's pond without leave, and insists he only look closely at them with a basket. Even now, it is hard to tell whether he believes this defence. A cotter complains that smoke from his neighbour's kiln blackens his washing. Another says the kiln has stood there longer than the cotter has had shirts worth discussing. The room swells and eases with each case like a lung filling with grievances. For all its tedium, the court matters because it binds the manor to itself. This is how authority reaches into daily life, not always with grandeur, often with fines measured in hens, grain, labour days, and embarrassed silence. A knight in such a place learns that peace is not the absence of conflict. It is conflict kept small enough to fit on a bench beside the wall. At one point the scribe pauses to trim his quill with a penknife so sharp and neat it seems almost priestly. His left cuff is stained with ink, and a smear darkens the side of his thumb where he has rubbed away at some earlier blot. You watch the motions, the scrape, the breath, the return to the page, and remember that lordship runs on ink nearly as much as on iron. A charter can outlast a sword arm. A fine written down becomes harder to argue with later, though many try. Some swear scribes know a sort of quiet magic, turning speech into obligation with a few black lines on parchment. The scribes themselves usually call it spelling. At the back of the room stands the suspicious dog, having entered with one of the villagers and clearly decided to remain for legal reasons. It settles under the bench near the widow's feet and closes its eyes, as if this entire proceeding is beneath its notice. No one puts it out. Perhaps even the steward has accepted that some presences are simply older than rules. As the cases dwindle, the air in the chamber grows warmer and heavier. Damp wool, tallow, old rushes, cold mud drying on boots, a faint trace of onions from someone's sleeve, it all mingles into the smell of governance. Your legs stiffen. The steward's voice roughens. The reeve rubs the bridge of his nose as though hoping to erase half the village. Still the business goes on, because land, animals, weather, hunger, and human nature never stop generating material. At last the final matter is heard, a dispute over who owes for repairs to a section of hedge trampled by someone's cattle during last week's wind. Witnesses are vague. The hedge is less so. Payment is split. Nobody is pleased, which, again, suggests fairness. When the court breaks, people rise slowly, talking already in lower voices, carrying away judgments they will call wisdom or robbery depending on whom they meet first. The steward gathers his tablets. The scribe blows gently on a line of ink. The widow leaves with her dignity sharpened. The goose owner leaves poorer and more alert. The merchant bows with exaggerated gratitude, which is how merchants say they will remember this favour forever and charge accordingly. You stand and feel the room release you. Outside, the day has shifted toward noon, though the light remains thin. Somewhere in the hall the smell of the main meal begins to rise. Behind you the chamber still holds the echo of voices arguing over furrows, tolls, geese, fish, and the boundaries of obligation. It is not glorious. It is not the stuff of carved tombs or embroidered songs. But this, too, is knighthood when not in battle. To sit in damp rooms and help keep a small world from fraying apart over cabbage, timber, and lies told with very straight faces. When you step out from the manor court, the day feels strangely brighter, though this may be only because you have escaped a room dense with grievances, damp wool, and the legal adventures of geese. The inner ward is alive with noon movement now. Servants cross from kitchen to hall carrying covered dishes and baskets of bread. A boy runs with a folded cloth over both arms as though transporting a relic. Somewhere near the buttery a cask is being shifted with much straining and advice from men not touching it. The bells have already marked the hour, and their sound still seems to hang over the keep like a reminder that hunger, like prayer, keeps excellent time. You follow the smell into the hall again, and at once the world changes from cold stone and practical justice to warmth, smoke, and the formal theatre of eating. The hall at dinner is fuller than it was at breakfast, louder too, though still governed by invisible lines everyone understands. Firelight trembles up toward the soot-dark rafters. Sunlight, what little there is of it, reaches through the high windows in pale stripes and vanishes into smoke. Rushes soften the stone underfoot, and the long tables stand laid with trenchers, knives, cups, coarse cloths, and the expectation that every person present will remember exactly who they are. This is the main meal of the day, and it matters, not only for nourishment, though that is reason enough. It matters because dinner is one of the places where hierarchy becomes visible, courtesy is tested, alliances are warmed, and a knight's reputation is displayed without anyone drawing a sword. A man may ride well, pray well, even judge well in court, but if he reaches before his better, talks too loudly at the wrong moment, or gnaws a bone like a wolf disguised in wool, his dignity can suffer a most undramatic death. You pause near the entrance while the hall settles into its order. At the high end, on the dais, the Lord's table is set apart, not by walls but by arrangement, which is often more effective. Better cloth, better view, better dishes. Lower down stretch the other boards where household knights, squires, clerks, guests, and servants, according to place and custom, will be seated or will serve. Rank here is not merely known, it is performed, every cup passed, every bench assigned. Every nod of greeting becomes part of the long old grammar of noble life. You take your place where it is proper, neither too high for comfort nor too low for notice. Around you others settle with the small noises of wood, leather, and tired knees. The knight who earlier collected crumbs in his beard with such dedication now appears freshly brushed, though his beard still holds the expression of a man inclined towards storage. Across from you, a younger squire sits very upright, plainly determined to behave as if he's been dining with princes since infancy, which is unfortunate because the effort itself makes him look like a broom in a tunic. Before eating begins, hands are washed again. A servant comes along the table with a ewer and basin, pouring water over fingers one pair at a time, while another offers a linen towel whose cleanliness has survived perhaps one optimistic inspection. Washing before meals is not only practical, though after a morning of rains, mud, wax tablets, and bridge timbers, practicality deserves its moment. It is also courteous, visible, part of the rhythm of civilized life. Clean hands, lowered voices. Waiting until grace is done, these things separate a noble household from a band of starving brigands, which is generally considered worthwhile. Grace is said, heads bow. A chaplain's voice moves briefly through the smoke. Then the meal begins. The first dishes come out in procession coarse bread, pottage richer than the morning's, perhaps thickened with peas or barley, platters of boiled beef if fortune and stores permit, smoked fish on fasting days or near them, onions, leeks, perhaps a little mustard sharp enough to wake old sins. A roast bird may appear at the higher end, or slices of venison from some earlier hunt, though such luxuries travel downward only selectively. Trenchers of stale bread are used beneath meat and sauce, soaking what falls and may afterward be eaten, distributed, or given away. Nothing in a great hall escapes hierarchy, not even gravy. You take your knife, break bread, and begin carefully. This is not delicate dining in the later courtly sense, but neither is it chaos. A knight is expected to cut cleanly, share when appropriate, avoid taking the best piece before his betters have chosen, and refrain from turning appetite into spectacle. There are rules for where bones go, for how cups are passed, for not wiping greasy fingers on one's cloak unless one wishes to look like a failed siege in human form. Courtesy manuals exist for a reason. Human beings, left entirely to instinct around roast meat, are capable of sorrowful things. The noise grows, but in layers rather than confusion. At the dais, conversation is measured, sometimes low, sometimes punctuated by a laugh that signals safety for others to laugh as well. Lower down, men speak more freely of the roads, rents, horses, weather, and whoever has made a fool of himself most recently. The steward, now released from the concentrated misery of the court, eats while listening to 3 separate conversations at once, which may be why he always looks as though joy was once described to him inaccurately. The scribe dines farther down, still with ink at his cuff, cutting bread with the same grave care he gives to parchment. A covered dish is borne to the high table, and the cloth lifted reveals a roast capon browned and fragrant. This causes, among the lesser tables, a small ripple of admiring resentment. The younger squire across from you tries not to stare and fails with elegance. You do not blame him. Smell has always been the most democratic form of temptation. A cup of ale is passed. You drink. It is stronger than the morning's and pleasantly dulls the edge left by court business. Across the table, the other knight leans in and remarks that the bridge near the mill will take more timber than the steward expects, which is both a practical observation and a subtle warning that someone will later try to economize foolishly. Beside him, another man comments on a visiting merchant seen in the yard with cloth from overseas, or at least cloth from somewhere far enough away to make boasting worthwhile. Dinner conversation often hovers between logistics and gossip, because both are forms of survival. Near the centre of the hall, two travellers have been given places somewhat below their ambitions and somewhat above their likely means. One appears to be a minor retainer from a neighbouring household, the other perhaps a clerk or messenger, his satchel close at hand and his expression careful. Guests must be watched, fed, and weighed all at once. Hospitality is a duty and a display, but it is also a kind of listening. Men reveal themselves when they believe they are merely chewing. As the dishes circulate, you notice again how much a hall depends on service. Women from the kitchens move with rapid certainty, carrying platters, collecting scraps, refilling cups, all while avoiding benches, elbows, hounds, and the occasional thoughtless boot. Boys weave among them with trenchers stacked high, or jugs braced to their chests. One false step could send lentils across a knight's lap and alter a career. Yet the work goes on with astonishing skill, mostly unpraised, always necessary. At your feet, naturally, one of the hall dogs has resumed its ministry among crumbs. It is not the suspicious dog from earlier, though perhaps a cousin in spirit broad-headed, one ear torn, eyes lifted with the devout patience of a creature convinced human civilization exists to drop fat. A bit of gristle falls from somewhere up the bench. The dog receives it as though heaven has remained faithful after all. No one can quite agree whether table manners make a man noble or merely reveal whether he was raised near people who would correct him. Some swear courtesy is the outer skin of virtue. Others think it mostly prevents arguments over elbows. In either case, it matters. A knight must know when to speak and when not to. He must not interrupt his better. He must show attention to ladies and priests without seeming theatrical about either. He must laugh at the Lord's lighter remarks, though not too eagerly, and avoid being the first to begin any topic likely to end in politics, heresy, or whose hawk is finer. A woman of the household, perhaps the lady herself. Perhaps a relation of rank sits at the higher end with fur at her sleeves, and a narrow gold circlet catching the light. Her conversation is quieter than the men's, but followed more closely. She asks after the road beyond the village and whether the stream crossing remains passable for a small covered cart. Instantly half the table becomes more thoughtful, because practical questions from powerful women tend to contain future consequences. You answer with due respect that the bridge by the mill needs mending before heavier passage, and she nods once, as if placing that fact into some larger pattern of cloth, candles, guests, and obligations known only to those who truly run castles. Music does not always accompany dinner, but today a young musician near the screen passage plucks softly at a stringed instrument, while waiting to see whether better company will require him later. The tune is simple, winding under the talk rather than over it. A little too cheerful for the room, perhaps, but not enough to offend. Some swear music aids digestion. Others say it only encourages drunk uncles to sing. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, though every hall contains at least one man certain he is more musical after ale. The courses continue. More bread, more broth, a dish of beans, perhaps an apple preserved from autumn stores, wrinkled but sweet. At the high table, spiced wine may appear. the scent of clove and cinnamon drifting down like a rumour from paradise. Spices are status you can smell. Even a little announces trade, wealth, and a taste for reminding others of both. Conversation shifts as appetites ease. Now come the softer currents of the meal news from another manor, a mention of a coming feast day, a dispute between two abbeys over relics or grazing rights or both, because churchmen, for all their holiness, are never wholly free from practical enthusiasm. Someone says a peddler claimed to carry a vial of oil blessed near the tomb of a saint who protects against fever and wolf bites. Another asks dryly whether it also protects against tax collectors. A few low laughs answer that. The chaplain pretends not to hear, which is often the kindest form of diplomacy. By now the squire across from you is relaxed enough to eat like a human being rather than a carved emblem of obedience. Unfortunately, this leads him to bite too quickly into mustard and go briefly cross-eyed with pain. He recovers with admirable speed and absolutely no dignity. You keep your expression calm out of charity. The knight beside you shows less restraint and coughs suspiciously into his cup. As trenches are changed and scraps gathered, the hall grows warmer, heavier, more companionable. The hard edges of the morning soften. Even the steward's shoulders settle a little. Dinner in a great household is not rest exactly, but it is a pause in which order feeds itself. People are seen, hierarchies are confirmed, small courtesies are exchanged like coins. A knight learns as much here about the life expected of him as he does in the yard how to occupy space without arrogance. Speak without babbling, defer without seeming diminished, and take his portion without clutching at it. At last the meal begins its slow decline. Cups empty, hands are wiped, grace is said again by some, silently by others. Benches scrape back. The dogs, sensing the end with professional instinct, become suddenly hopeful in every direction at once. Servants descend on the tables like a disciplined tide. You rise with the rest, carrying with you the smell of roasted meat, smoke, wet wool, and spiced wine you did not drink. The hall has done its work. It has fed the body, displayed the household, reminded every soul present where they belong, and wrapped authority in bread and broth so thoroughly that it hardly seemed like power at all. And as you step away from the table under the dim rafters, with the noise still rolling warmly behind you, you understand that for a night in peacetime, dinner is never just dinner. It is a lesson in rank, restraint, observation, and the endless art of being seen behaving properly while hungry. When the hall releases you at last, it does so reluctantly, as halls always seem to. Warmth clings to your cloak, smoke clings to your hair, and the slow heaviness of a full meal settles into your limbs with the persuasive logic of a sermon delivered beside a fire. Outside, the inner ward feels sharper than before, the air cooler against your face after the thickness of meat, ale, and voices. The light has already begun its quiet turn toward afternoon, though the sun itself remains a pale and somewhat unreliable witness behind thin cloud. Men peel away from the hall in different directions according to station and habit. Some go toward the stables, some toward the yard. A squire is sent at speed to find a missing glove that everyone knows is probably in his own sleeve. The steward vanishes into administrative darkness with the scribe drifting after him like a tall ink stain. A servant girl carries away a stack of trenchers with the determined gait of someone who has long ago accepted that civilization rests on her not slipping. You, however, turn toward the chapel. It stands within the inner ward where stone and custom have made a place for stillness, though stillness in a castle is always relative. Even as you approach, you hear life continuing around it, the hollow ring of hammer on metal from the smithy. the snort of a horse, distant voices on the wall walk, the scrape of a barrel rolled somewhere out of sight. Yet the chapel door, once crossed, changes the weight of sound. The noise does not vanish, it falls back, softened, as if reminded to remove its boots. Inside, the air is dim and cool and touched by the scent of beeswax, old incense, and damp stone that has absorbed centuries of prayer without ever quite learning to smile. Candle flames burn in their own patient kingdom, each one a small golden answer to the grey outside. Light gathers on the altar cloth, along the polished edge of a metal cross, on carved wood darkened by years of hands. There are painted saints along the walls, their robes faded and their expressions grave in the way of people who are either very holy or very tired. In this world, the distinction is sometimes difficult to prove. You let the door close behind you and stand for a moment, eyes adjusting. After the hall, the silence here feels almost physical, not empty, not dead, but layered the silence of breathing, of kneeling, of wax softening near flame, of one person shifting carefully on the bench behind you. A woman from the household is already there, head bowed, fingers working quietly over the beads of a paternoster. At the side altar, an old man in rough wool touches his brow, chest, and shoulders with a slowness suggesting either deep devotion or a stiff back. Both are accepted forms of piety. A knight is expected to pray, and not merely in the public ceremonial sense. Prayer belongs to the structure of the day just as meals do, just as bells do, just as the changing of watches and the mending of tack do. That does not mean every prayer is noble in intention or elegant in wording. Many are practical, some are tired, some are frightened. Some are simply habits carried so long they begin before thought catches up. Men ask for victory, certainly, but also for health, for mercy, for a child to survive winter, for a horse to recover from lameness, for a fever to pass, for an oath not to come back and ruin them. You move farther in and kneel. The stones are cold even through the layers of cloth. The boards of the kneeler creak. Ahead of you the altar is lit by 6 candles, though one has burned down lower than the others and leans slightly in its iron holder, its wax pooled and hardened around the base. That sight, a half-failing candle stubbornly carrying on, feels familiar somehow, and you think of the half-burned one in your chamber last night, of all the small lights a castle nurses against cold, darkness, and uncertainty. Private devotion is a different thing from chapel attendance at dawn. Then, you were part of the household body, moving within prayer as part of rank and rhythm. Now, after court and dinner, you are here more alone. The words come more slowly. You pray first for what is expected for your Lord, for the household, for the peace of the manor, for the health of horses and men, for wisdom enough not to let the bridge by the mill become a larger failure than it already threatens to be. You pray for the tenants in their thatched cottages, though you would not say so too sentimentally aloud. Their labour feeds the hall, and everyone in the keep knows this even when they pretend not to think on it. Then your thoughts wander, because thoughts always do. They settle on the relic casket set to one side of the chapel, where a little silvered box rests on a cloth beneath a hanging lamp. It is not large. Most relics are smaller than their reputations. This one is said to hold a fragment of bone from some saint or blessed personage, whose name the chaplain pronounces with confidence and the household repeats with varying degrees of understanding. Whether it is truly what it claims to be is another matter. No one can quite agree whether relics are holy because of what they contain, or because people have knelt before them for generations and would rather not consider alternatives. Still, the casket draws the eye. A few ribbons hang near it, left as offerings or reminders of answered prayers. There is a pilgrim badge there too, pinned beside the cloth, lead or pewter worn smooth at the edges. Someone once came here from the road, knelt, and left proof of having gone elsewhere in search of grace. The medieval world is full of such objects, bits of metal, wax, cloth, bone, splintered wood, small things asked to carry enormous hope. You rise after a time and step toward the side altar. The lamp above it flickers gently. The relic casket has been polished recently, though a little dust clings in the carved corners where no cloth quite reaches. A man can cross fields in armour, sit in court over geese, inspect rotten timber, and still feel unexpectedly moved by a small silver box in a stone chapel. This, too, is part of the life. Knighthood is supposed to stand on courage and discipline, yet it leans just as often on symbol, ritual, and the comfort of believing that heaven notices local troubles. A chaplain emerges softly from a side door, perhaps having heard you enter, perhaps simply moving through his own afternoon duties. He's not old, but chapel light makes all clergy appear slightly carved. His hands are narrow and clean, though ink darkens one finger near the nail. Even priests in castles are not free of writing. He inclines his head to you and asks quietly after the ride to the manor bounds, and when you mention the bridge, he nods with the grave concern of a man who understands that broken crossings inconvenience not only grain carts, but charitable intentions. He tells you, almost in passing, that one of the women in the village has asked for prayers for a feverish child. Another has requested the loan of a blessed candle end, believing it helps ward off night terrors. Some swear candle wax from the altar, kept beside a cradle or tucked beneath a mattress, eases both bad dreams and malign spirits. Others say it chiefly reassures mothers, which may amount to the same thing. The chaplain does not mock the belief. Few sensible clergy do, in a hard world. People braid official faith with older habits and folk cures until the strands cannot be separated without breaking something tender. He also mentions, with the restrained diplomacy of his kind, that a local pilgrim has recently passed through with a badge from a northern shrine said to cure aching joints if touched before sleep. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether the cure comes from sanctity, silver, or the long walk required to obtain it, yet many limp toward shrines all the same. You speak quietly with him for a few moments more, not of grand theology, not of heaven and hell in the abstract, rather of ordinary spiritual burdens a household's fears, the mood of the villagers, whether the coming feast day might call for more alms if the weather turns. He listens with that peculiar clerical stillness that makes every sentence sound as though it may be copied into a book later. Before you part, he offers a brief blessing. You bow your head and receive it, not dramatically. Just as one receives warmth from a fire one happens to be standing near. After he withdraws, you remain in the chapel, letting the quiet settle again. A draught moves faintly through the room, stirring the edge of the altar cloth. Somewhere outside, a raven calls from the wall, the sound muffled by stone. The woman with the prayer beads has gone. In her place now sits a boy, perhaps a page, perhaps the same one who earlier nearly drowned in pottage and then in mustard, staring up at a painted saint with the expression of someone trying to decide whether holiness looks more like hunger or boredom. He crosses himself very carefully, then notices you and straightens at once. At the rear of the chapel hangs a board with little wax tablets and scraps of parchment fixed beneath it, names to be remembered in prayer, notices of masses owed, perhaps a gift promised in thanksgiving if some danger passes. The medieval soul lives among records just as the medieval manor does. Heaven, too, appears to be administered through lists. You glance once more at the relic casket, the ribbons, the badge, the little hardened tiers of wax. Even now, it's hard to tell whether the power of such things lies in the saint, the story, the faith of the people, or the simple need to place hope somewhere outside the body. Perhaps all of it together. A knight may train like a soldier and dine like a lord, but he also kneels like anyone else with cold hands and uncertain tomorrows. At last you rise. Your knees complain in a language older than chivalry. The chapel has left a stillness in you, though not a perfect one. No place in a castle grants perfect stillness. But this is enough candlelight on stone, a blessing half heard, the sense that even within all the ordinary burdens of land, courtesy, mud, and duty, there remains a narrow place where a man can lower his head and not have to perform. When you step back out into the ward, the afternoon has shifted again. The air feels less sharp, though the light already hints at decline. A servant passes with folded cloth. 2 hounds quarrel mildly over nothing. Somewhere above, boots cross the wall walk, and not far away, in some chamber or passage, stewards and scribes are surely gathering accounts, letters, and seals for the next part of the day's work. You draw your cloak closer and leave the chapel behind with the smell of wax still faintly in your sleeves, carrying into the brighter world that quiet, troubled, necessary kind of faith expected of a knight who spends far more time among worries than among wars. When you leave the chapel, the quiet does not follow you far. It fades in the courtyard like breath in cold air, replaced by the steadier rhythm of work that never quite stop inside a keep. The afternoon has settled into that thoughtful hour when shadows begin to lengthen, though no one speaks of evening yet. A cart rattles somewhere beyond the inner gate. A hammer strikes iron in the smithy with patient insistence. From the kitchens comes the scent of something being prepared for later, though no one rushes toward it. The day still has business left in it, and you, having prayed, must now turn toward ink. It is not the most heroic direction a knight can take, but it is one of the most necessary. You follow a narrow passage along the inner wall, past a doorway where a servant is shaking out wool blankets with enough force to suggest personal grievances, and arrive at a chamber set aside for accounts, letters, and the quiet authority of record-keeping. The door is half open. Inside, the light is better than in the manor court, though not by much. 2 candles and a slit window doing their best against the grey. The steward is already there, of course. He stands beside a table covered in wax tablets, rolled parchments, a small chest with iron fittings, and a scattering of objects that look dull but carry weight seals, cords, little knives, and a balance scale used for coins. The scribe sits nearby, hunched slightly, his quill moving with a soft scratching sound that is somehow more persistent than the hammer outside. Between them lies the true spine of the manor, not swords or walls, but lists. You step inside and close the door behind you, shutting out most of the yard's noise. The air here smells faintly of ink, warmed wax, and old paper, a dry, thoughtful scent that feels almost scholarly, if not for the occasional intrusion of damp stone. Good, the steward says without looking up, which is his way of acknowledging your presence and assigning you work in the same breath. He gestures to a stool. You take it. On the table before him lies a wax tablet marked with neat, shallow lines, each one a record of something owed, paid, delayed, or disputed. Rents in grain, rents in coin, labour days promised and not yet fulfilled, repairs ordered, like the bridge by the mill, now written into obligation. Numbers here are not abstract. Each mark corresponds to a sack of barley, a day in the fields, a hen surrendered, a cart repaired, a hedge mended. No one can quite agree whether writing makes a thing more real or simply harder to escape. But once something is set down here, it gains a kind of stubborn life. The steward begins with the simplest matters, though even these are not simple for long. He reads off entries, and the scribe translates them from wax to parchment where needed, his quill scratching steadily, pausing only to dip into ink or to blow gently on a line to dry it. Names pass between them like quiet echoes of the people you saw earlier: tenants, millers, labourers, names that carry mud and weather and small worries within them. You're asked to confirm what you saw on the ride. The bridge, you say again, must be repaired before market day. The steward nods once and makes a mark. That mark will become timber ordered, labour assigned, perhaps a complaint avoided, perhaps a different complaint created when someone decides the wrong man was told to do the work. A roll of parchment is opened. It bears a letter seal already broken, the wax still clinging to its edge like a memory of authority. The message comes from a neighbouring manor, written in a careful hand that leans slightly to the right. The scribe reads it aloud in a low voice, translating the formal phrasing into something closer to sense. There is mention of a boundary question, of grazing rights along a shared stretch of land, and a polite suggestion that your lord's men have been allowing cattle to wander beyond what is considered reasonable. You listen. The steward listens more closely. Words like reasonable and customary tend to carry hidden clause. Even now, it is hard to tell whether such letters are meant to resolve disputes or simply to begin them more elegantly. You give your account as you saw it: fields damp, boundaries uncertain in places, no clear sign of deliberate trespass, though the season makes everything softer, including lines drawn on land. The steward nods again, which is becoming a theme, and instructs the scribe to prepare a reply that is both courteous and entirely unwilling to concede anything prematurely. Diplomacy in ink is a careful art, too soft, and you invite demands, too sharp, and you invite retaliation. The correct tone is somewhere between agreement and a politely raised eyebrow. The scribe begins drafting at once, murmuring phrases under his breath before committing them to the page. His quill moves with more confidence now, the letters forming in dark, even strokes. You watch the words take shape, phrases of respect, assurances of attention, gentle deflections, a promise to review the matter with due care. It is almost impressive, the way a potential argument is wrapped in courtesy and sent back across the fields like a gift no one quite trusts. Nearby, a small brazier holds a bit of glowing charcoal, used to warm the wax for sealing. The steward lifts a stick of red wax, melts it carefully, and lets it drip onto a folded document. Then he presses a seal into it, a metal stamp bearing the mark of the household. When he lifts it away, the impression remains a sign that this piece of writing now carries weight beyond the ink itself. Seals matter here. A man's word is important. Yes, but a sealed letter travels farther and survives longer. Some swear a broken seal is as telling as a spoken lie. Others claim seals merely make lies more official. Either way, no one ignores them. A small chest is opened. Inside lie coins, sorted into little piles, each one dull with handling. The steward weighs a few on the balance scale, checking their measure with the seriousness of a man who knows that metal, like men, can sometimes pretend to be more than it is. A coin slightly too light may not seem much, but enough of them gathered together can quietly change a household's fortunes. You're asked to witness a tally, And you do so, not because your presence changes the numbers, but because it confirms that they have been seen. Witnessing is another quiet pillar of medieval life. Things exist more firmly when more than one pair of eyes has rested on them. The work continues in this steady, almost hypnotic rhythm. Read, confirm, mark, write, seal. Outside. The day moves on. Inside. Time feels slower, measured not by bells but by lines of ink and the soft tap of wax cooling. At one point, a servant enters with a small tray cups of watered wine and a plate of something simple, perhaps bread with a smear of soft cheese. Even in a room of accounts, the body must be remembered. The steward accepts without ceremony. The scribe barely looks up, though his hand pauses long enough to take a bite. You eat as well, quietly, the taste plain but welcome. After the hall's heavier meal, this feels almost like a reminder that life continues in smaller measures too. A loose parchment catches your eye, an older record. Perhaps edges curled slightly, ink faded. It lists rents from years past, names that may no longer belong to living men, fields that may have shifted or been divided, obligations that once seemed urgent and now sit quietly in the past. There is something strange in that, seeing how the careful work of one day becomes the quiet history of another. No one can quite agree whether writing preserves life or simply records its passing, but here, in this room, it does both. As the light from the narrow window begins to thin further, the steward finally leans back slightly, as though acknowledging that the day's accounts have reached a point where continuing would yield more error than clarity. The scribe sets down his quill, flexes his fingers, and inspects the page with a critical eye. Documents are gathered, wax tablets are stacked. The chest is closed with a firm, final sound. The room seems to exhale. You rise from the stool, feeling a stiffness in your back that no amount of sword practice quite prepares you for. There is a different kind of endurance required here, the endurance of attention, of patience, of sitting still while the world is reduced to marks and measures. Outside, the light has shifted again. The courtyard carries a softer tone now, as though the day is beginning its slow descent toward evening. Voices are quieter, movements less hurried. The long arc from dawn to dusk is bending toward its close. And as you step out of the chamber of accounts, with the faint smell of ink still lingering in your cloak, you understand something that no tale of battle ever quite captures, that a knight's life, when not spent in war, is held together just as much by parchment, wax, and careful words as by steel. By the time you leave the chamber of accounts, the afternoon has softened into that hushed, slanting hour when a castle seems briefly to loosen its grip on duty without ever truly releasing it. The light has gone pale gold where it touches the upper stone, while the lower yard already gathers shadow in corners and under eaves. Smoke rises more steadily from the kitchens now. A small chill has returned to the air. Not the fierce bite of dawn, but a patient creeping coolness that reminds you how quickly evening can come in a place built of stone. You cross the inner ward with ink, wax, and numbers still clinging faintly to your thoughts, and the change in work ahead feels almost luxurious. Not rest exactly. A night is rarely given anything so pure. But after the manor court, the tallying of rents, the reading of polite complaints disguised as letters, the thought of horse and open air comes as a mercy. In the stable yard, men are already making ready for an evening ride beyond the walls, not for inspection now, but for sport, display. And that peculiar mixture of appetite and ceremony called hunting. Hunting, in noble life, is never merely about meat. That is the first thing worth understanding. Yes, Game may be brought down, skinned, dressed, and later eaten in hall or kitchen yard. But the hunt is also rehearsal, hierarchy, exercise, pleasure, and proof. A man is seen there as clearly as at table or in the yard. How he sits a horse, how he handles a hound, how he speaks in company, whether he keeps his temper when the trail is lost. Whether he can laugh lightly when the whole business comes to nothing, these things matter. The stables are alive again with preparation. Grooms tighten girths, check hooves, sort reins. A hawking glove hangs from a peg, and nearby a hooded bird of prey perches on a stand with the absolute stillness of a creature that has transcended all human fuss. The falconer stands close by, leather glove on one hand, speaking in low tones to no one and everyone. He is one of those men who seem shaped by their trade, narrow-faced, keen-eyed, smelling faintly of feathers and old leather. The bird on his wrist is a compact thing of quiet power, hooded and patient, its jesses hanging neat, its talons curved around the glove with delicate menace. Some evenings the household rides with hounds to follow scent through the wood. Some evenings it is hawking, where the beauty lies in the sudden release, the upward arc, the wheeling strike, and the noble satisfaction of owning a creature more elegant than most humans you know. Tonight, it seems, the outing will be a blend of both hounds to flush, hawk to follow, horses to carry everyone into the fading light with just enough dignity to keep gossip manageable. You mount in the stable yard while a groom gives the final check to your saddle. The horse beneath you is fresher now than you expected, as though the morning's work was merely a thoughtful suggestion. Nearby, 2 other knights are mounting as well, along with a younger nobleman whose cloak is finer than his seat, and a lady riding side saddle on a calm mare the colour of smoke. Her gloved hand rests lightly on the pommel, and she looks entirely at ease in a way that instantly makes several men more careful with themselves. A few hounds strain at their leads, all ribs, muscle, and optimism. The suspicious dog from earlier has appeared once again, keeping to the edge of the group with the air of an unpaid consultant. No one invited it. No one is surprised to see it. The gate opens and the party moves out. The road beyond the keep has changed since morning. The village is quieter now, work turned inward toward barns, yards, and hearths. Smoke thickens above the cottages. Children who earlier ran barefoot through the mud now linger nearer doors. A woman stands at the roadside with a basket on one arm, watching the riders pass with the look too practised to be curiosity and too calm to be awe. She has seen such outings before. The manor rides out to inspect, to travel, to hunt, to display itself to its own lands, all a part of the same pattern. You pass the roadside shrine again, the little painted saint dim under its weathered cover. In the softer evening light it seems older, more secretive. A bit of ribbon tied there earlier in the day now stirs almost silver in the wind. One of the older men in the party mutters that this is good weather for hawking, though some swear birds see strange things at dusk and may turn wilful when the light changes. Others say that is merely an excuse used by bad falconers and vain knights. The falconer, hearing this, makes a noise deep in his throat that could mean disdain or agreement. The road bends toward the woodland edge. Here the air changes, carrying the cool, damp scent of leaf mould, bark, moss, and distant water. The trees stand bare in places, their branches etched dark against a paling sky, while in other parts the underwood remains thick enough to catch its leaves and swallow sound. The hounds grow livelier at once, noses low, tails sharp with purpose. Horses pick carefully over roots and softer ground. Hooves muffled now by pine needles and damp earth instead of road mud. No one can quite agree whether the pleasure of the hunt lies in the chase, the company, or simply the excuse to ride through beautiful country without admitting one is sentimental. Probably all three. You move through the trees in a loose file, cloaks shifting, tack creaking, breath rising faintly from horses and men alike. Somewhere overhead a rook complains from a branch. Somewhere deeper in the wood something small darts through brush and vanishes, leaving only the hounds to quiver with possibilities. Hunting has its own music, the jingle of harness, the click of a hawk's jesses, the low murmur of riders, the sudden eager cry when scent is taken. The moments of silence in between when the whole company seems to lean forward together into listening. The falconer at last lifts the hood from the bird. The hawk blinks once, twice, the gold of its eye catching what remains of the light. For a moment it stays where it is, contained power, feathers close and smooth. Then it shifts on the glove and lifts slightly, as though the world has become newly interesting. The company stills without meaning to. Even the younger nobleman, who has been talking too much about a previous hunt he almost certainly misremembered, falls quiet. A beat later the bird is cast off. It rises with startling force, wings beating once, twice, then taking the air cleanly and climbing above the trees. Heads lift. The hounds pull at their leads. The falconer watches with a concentration so deep it seems devotional. Up there the hawk becomes less creature than intention, wheeling in widening circles over the woodland edge and the scrubby meadow beyond. The hunt moves with it. You ride out of the thicker trees into open ground where winter grass lies pale and flattened, brushed by the lowering light. Rabbits may be here, hares perhaps. Small game enough to interest both dogs and bird. The hounds are slipped and surge forward in a joyful storm of muscle and noise, running low over the field, veering, doubling back, then driving on. A cry goes up from one of the men, not loud, not wild, just enough to stir the horses and lift the pulse. Then, all at once, a shape breaks from the brush. It is only a hare, quick and brown and desperate, bounding low across the rough field. Yet for a few moments the whole evening gathers itself around that one thread of movement. The hounds swing after it, stretched long with effort. The hawk drops from above with terrifying grace, folding and falling in a dark curve that seems less like flight than judgment. Riders lean, call, urge horses on where the ground allows. Cloaks flare, breath clouds, hooves strike dull thuds into the earth. And then the hare twists. It vanishes through a break in the hedgerow so suddenly that the hounds overshoot by a stride. The hawk checks and lifts again, and the entire field dissolves into confusion, laughter, shouted instructions, and one horse deciding this is the ideal moment to object to a bush. The lady on the grey mare laughs first, low and clear, and the others follow with the relieved amusement of people who know failure is far easier to bear when it happens beautifully. The younger nobleman insists the hawk nearly had it. The falconer says nothing, which is somehow far more cutting. One of the older knights remarks that hares are proof God loves irony. Another says hares survive chiefly by making fools of the rich. There is truth in that. The hounds are called back by degrees, though one must be fetched from a patch of brambles where it has found nothing of value, but remains spiritually committed. The hawk returns at last to the glove, rewarded and hooded once more, calm again as if none of this concerned it personally. The field settles, horses walk, riders catch their breath. In the west, the sky has begun to burn softly through layers of cloud gold at the horizon, then rose, then a faded violet where evening already waits. You ride on a little farther. Not in pursuit now, but in that pleasant unwinding after effort, following the edge of the wood where the shadows deepen and the air smells of damp bark and distant smoke from the keep. Conversation loosens. Someone tells a story of a hunt years ago where a stag led 3 knights into a marsh and left them looking like disappointed turnips. Some swear forest roads are haunted at dusk by pale women, lantern lights, or monks who vanished decades earlier. Others say what men see in the woods at evening depends mostly on the amount of wine they had at dinner. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the old tales are warnings, amusements, or excuses for getting lost with style. As you turn back toward home, the bells from the monastery drift over the fields once more, softened by distance and evening mist. The sound seems to gather the whole landscape together, wood, road, field, hedgerow, horse, hound, hawk, and rider into one slow fold of time. The keep appears ahead on its rise, windows beginning to glow one by one as candles are lit within. Smoke thickens above it. The world is drawing inward again, and as you ride back under the deepening sky, with the hounds tiring, the hawk hooded, your horse warm beneath you, and the laughter of the failed chase lingering pleasantly in the cold, you understand that hunting for a medieval knight is not an escape from duty so much as its gentler cousin. It is discipline dressed as pleasure, hierarchy disguised as sport, and a way of meeting the evening not with idleness, but with movement, skill, and the old noble desire to make even leisure look meaningful. By the time you pass back beneath the gatehouse arch, evening has settled properly over the keep, not darkness yet, but that suspended hour when the sky outside is the colour of cooling iron, and every window lit from within looks more welcoming than it really is. The horses go in steaming, heads lowered, tack creaking softly as grooms step forward to take reins and speak to them in the low, practical voices reserved for creatures far more sensible than noblemen. The hounds are gathered, counted, untangled, and return to their noisy kingdom. The hawk disappears with the falconer into a quieter corner of the household to hood, perch, and whatever mysterious judgment such birds make on human competence. You dismount in the yard and land with more heaviness than grace, which is one of the little truths age, weather, and honest riding bring to everyone eventually. A groom takes your horse. You thank him, because a knight who never thanks the men handling his horse is merely volunteering for future inconvenience. Nearby, the younger nobleman from the hunt is already explaining to anyone who will listen that the hare turned unnaturally sharply and may well have been one of those uncanny creatures country folk whisper about. Half beast and half omen. No one openly laughs at him. A few mouths make brave attempts. The air has sharpened again. Evening in a stone place always reminds you that wolves store cold with an almost devotional commitment. Smoke drifts low from the kitchen vents. Somewhere on the wall walk a watchman calls softly to another. A lantern is being lit under the passage to the hall, and the first glow of it lies trembling on the damp stones like watered honey. You make your way inside. After the open air of the hunt, the hall feels at once crowded and comforting. Firelight leans and flickers up the blackened rafters, catching on beams, metal cups, and the edges of hanging cloths. The heat near the hearth is real enough to be noticed, though the farther benches remain in stubborn negotiation with the cold. Supper is not the great display that dinner was. It is looser, smaller, more intimate in its own smoky fashion. Some men have already settled on stools or benches with cups in hand. Others stand near the fire stretching their backs, warming fingers, or simply enjoying the privilege of not being required to ride, judge, count, or kneel for a few minutes. This is the hour for guests, gossip, and the long low work of conversation. A servant presses a cup of warm ale or thin wine into your hand. It smells faintly spiced, perhaps with cloves if the steward has lately wished the household to seem prosperous, perhaps only with something cheaper and more hopeful. Either way, the cup is warm, and that is enough. You stand for a moment by the hearth and feel the heat reach your knees, your palms, your face, while behind you the room stirs with its evening life bowls being set out. Crusts passed around, cloak clasps loosened, laughter beginning and then sinking back again into the general hum. Supper itself is plain compared with the day's main meal. Bread again, of course. Broth or a lighter pottage, perhaps some cheese, bits of smoked fish or cold meat if the kitchen has any mercy left after the day's demands, a few shriveled apples from autumn stores, maybe nuts in a wooden bowl that no one can open gracefully without appearing to challenge them personally. The food is not the point now. The point is warmth, company, and the easing of the body from daylight into night. At one of the nearer benches sit the two travellers who dined earlier, now more willing to speak. One turns out to be a messenger from a neighbouring household, on his way farther south with letters and a horse he clearly trusts less than he trusts bad roads. The other is a clerk attached to a minor lord, carrying a satchel with more parchment in it than any sane person would wish to guard over winter lanes. They have been given places by the fire, which is both hospitality and supervision. Men talk more readily when warm. You sit not too far off, cup in hand, while the room gathers round stories the way cold hands gather round embers. The messenger begins first, because messengers always do once fed. He tells of a bridge farther east washed half out by rain, of a cart axle snapping in a market lane, of a priest who insisted his mule could sense approaching storms and was therefore exempt from ordinary criticism. This last detail produces the first honest laugh of the evening. The messenger swears it is true. The clerk says the mule may indeed sense storms but still bites like original sin. Those who tell the tale never fully agree on whether the priest or the mule was worse company. A little farther down the bench, one of the older household men contributes a story about sheltering in a monastery guest house during a snow 3 winters past, where the monks fed everyone boiled onions, black bread, and a fish stew so severe it seemed intended to improve the soul through disappointment. He claims one monk there kept a saint's finger bone in a crystal tube and brought it out whenever travellers looked particularly unconvinced by the soup. Someone asks whether the relic improved the taste. He says not at all, but it did make complaints feel risky. Around the hall, servants move in and out with bowls and pitchers, their steps quick but less frantic now. A dog sleeps under the bench with its nose tucked against its ribs, opening one eye only when cheese is mentioned or dropped. The suspicious dog from earlier has returned too, because naturally it has, and sits a little apart in the passage between hearth and wall, with the poise of a creature who has appointed itself guardian of all conversational standards. One ear remains bent. It blinks as though privately evaluating every story. As the light outside continues to fail, candles are brought in, beeswax for the better tables, tallow where economy wins. The beeswax burns cleaner, honey scented and golden. The tallow smokes more and asks less of the budget. Their mixed smell joins the hall's old perfume of soot, ale, wool, damp leather, and human fatigue. It is the scent of medieval evening itself, if such a thing can be distilled warm, smoky, a little sour, entirely alive. A woman from the household enters with sewing in her lap and takes a place near the better light, listening more than speaking, beside her. Another begins carding wool with practised hands, drawing the fibres out in soft pale clouds while the talk flows on. Even rest is rarely idle here. Hands seek work almost by instinct. A man near the far end of the hall sharpens a small knife on a whetstone, the sound faint and rhythmic under the conversation. Another oils a strap while pretending not to be listening. Everyone is listening. You let your shoulders ease and your attention drift. This is one of the gentler truths of evening in a keep conversation is not always meant to be followed all the way through. It moves around you like river water, one tale touching another, bits of gossip catching on remembered names, laughter rising and fading, old rumours resurfacing like corks, a merchant seen on the road, a cousin betrothed to someone with more sheep than charm, a cellar rat found drowned in the ale and quietly not mentioned until after the cask was finished, a novice monk who sleepwalks into cloisters, a relic no one trusts, a dog that keeps following people about the castle as though expecting better management. That last one earns a glance toward the bent-eared creature, who remains studiously neutral. No one can quite agree whether gossip is a vice or the mortar that holds households together. Probably both. Without it, no one would know whom to trust, whom to avoid, or whose claims about miracle cheeses should be taken as satire. With too much of it, half the hall would be offended before complying. The skill lies in handling it as one handles a fire close enough for warmth, not close enough to blister. The clerk from the neighbouring lord's household is eventually coaxed into speaking of his master's hall, and here the evening grows especially attentive. Rival households are irresistible subjects. He describes a lady with 6 hunting hounds and a temper equal to all of them, a steward who counts candles as if they were holy relics, and a chaplain who claims to dream of St. Michael whenever accounts do not balance. This seems suspiciously convenient, even now. It is hard to tell whether piety and administration are friends or merely long-term cellmates. A musician near the screen passage takes up his instrument again, not boldly, just enough to thread a tune through the room. It is slower than the noon playing, softer, better suited to firelight and tired people. The notes rest in the hall rather than bouncing through it. Someone hums a line or two, then wisely stops before becoming the evening's cautionary tale. At the high end, the lord or his senior household, if he is elsewhere, speaks in lower tones with the messenger, no doubt sorting what news matters and what merely sounds impressive after dark. You do not strain to hear. A knight in peacetime learns the value of selective curiosity. Too much listening upward looks ambitious. Too little makes a man dull. The sweet spot lies in appearing attentive to the room while not obviously counting secrets. One of the squires, now safely away from the terrors of mustard and mounted drills, ventures a story of seeing corpse lights beyond a marsh road in autumn, small pale flames dancing above the ground where no torch should be. Some swear they are souls, others trapped vapours, others the devil's own trick for leading travellers into bogs. The older men let him finish. Then one says mildly that most wandering lights turn out to be moonshine, marsh gas, or men who have had more ale than path. The squire insists these were different. Of course they were. Youth would collapse if mystery were too quickly explained. The hall grows warmer as the evening deepens, though the draughts never entirely surrender. Cloaks are drawn tighter at the edges of the room, looser near the hearth. Cups are refilled. Bread is broken smaller now. Voices drop almost without noticing. Fatigue softens vanity. Faces lit by fire become older, kinder, stranger, more private. In such light, even the proud look merely human. You sit among them and feel the day settling inside you in layers dawn in the bailey, prayer, pottage, the training yard, the stables, the ride across fields, the manor court, the chapel, the chamber of accounts, the failed elegance of the hunt, and now this firelight, low talk, tired hands, and stories winding upward with the smoke. Battle is what later generations remember about nights, because battle is loud and easy to point at. But this is the deeper fabric of the life-watching, listening, measuring people by how they sit at day's end when the work is done and only the truth of their habits remains. The candles burn lower, somewhere outside. The wind presses softly at the shutters. A bell sounds in the distant monastery or chapel, hard to tell now through wall and night air. The suspicious dog shifts, sighs, and sets its head on its paws as if even it can feel the room turning toward quieter things. And in that smoky hall, among travellers, servants, household folk, and the gentle untidiness of evening talk, you understand how much of a night's world is built not from glory, but from company the stories exchanged, the rumours weighed, the warmth borrowed from a shared fire while darkness gathers just beyond the oak doors. By the time the evening talk begins to thin, the hall has taken on that softer, heavier feeling that comes after firelight, food, and too many stories told by men warming into themselves. The candles burn lower in their sockets. The rushes on the floor smell more strongly now that the room has been trodden all day. A few cups still move from hand to hand, but more slowly, as if even the ale has grown sleepy. One by one, people begin to peel away toward their own corners of the keep servants to the kitchens and lofts, squires to shared chambers, clerks to parchments, travellers to whatever guest bedding has been judged suitable for their station and scent. You rise at last, feeling the accumulated day in your shoulders, knees, and lower back. It settles on you not like defeat, but like weight honestly carried. Dawn in the bailey, cold water, prayer, the yard, the ride across the manor, the little court of geese and grievances, the hall, the chapel, the accounts, the hunt, the firelit talk, none of it has been spectacular, and all of it has left its mark. This is often the shape of a night's weariness when no battle interrupts it. Not one sharp blow, but a long collection of small obediences. The air outside the hall is colder than you expect, as though night has been waiting just beyond the doors and now greets you personally. A servant passes with the lantern, its horn-panelled sides throwing wavering gold over the stone. Another carries folded linens toward the chambers above. Somewhere in the yard, a horse shifts in its stall and knocks lightly at timber with a hoof. The watch has been set on the walls. You can hear the faint murmur of voices overhead, boots crossing the walk, then fading. You make your way down a passage toward the more private side of the household, where chambers, storage rooms, and small service spaces gather in a quieter cluster of stone and wood. Here the smells change. Less ale, less smoke from the great hearth, more rush matting, beeswax, cold plaster, chest lids, wool blankets aired and folded, herbs tucked into corners against damp and moth. A narrow stair turns upward. The worn centre of each step tells its own story of years and feet and nightly exhaustion. Bathing, in the luxurious modern sense, is not what waits for you. Let us be fair to history and to your expectations. No steaming tiled chamber appears, no attentive attendants pour perfumed water, while musicians play softly behind a curtain. Medieval life occasionally offers baths, yes, but usually as events, arrangements, or household campaigns requiring fuel, labour, tubs, and patience. What you receive tonight is more ordinary and, in its way, more revealing. In your chamber, or perhaps in a small adjoining room shared for washing, a wooden tub has been brought in, not large enough for grandeur, but deep enough to hold warm water up to the dignity line. Steam rises from it in pale ribbons. Beside it stand a pitcher, a folded linen cloth, a coarse cake of soap, and a small bowl containing herbs steeped in the water to improve both its smell and its moral character. Rosemary, perhaps. Lavender, if someone is feeling ambitious. There is also a stool, a blanket draped over it, and the understanding that whatever comfort exists here has been earned through someone else carrying a great deal of hot water upstairs. A servant or squire helps arrange the space, then withdraws. Privacy among the wealthy exists more in degree than in absolute form, but even so, the door closes, the room stills, and for a moment you are alone with the tub, the candle, and the astonishing luxury of warmth. You strip slowly, because cold rooms discourage dramatic movement. Boots first, and with them a faint release in the feet, then belt, tunic, the layers of wool and linen that have held the whole day against your skin. The air touches you at once and proves itself unkind. You step into the tub with the solemn determination of a man crossing into a minor miracle. The water is not hot enough to erase your troubles, but it is wonderfully, deeply warm. You lower yourself with a controlled hiss and feel the ache begin to loosen from your legs and hips. The herbs rise around you in a faint green scent. Candlelight moves on the wooden surface of the water and along the stone wall. Outside, distant through shutter and passage. The keep continues its life in softer tones. Footsteps, a closing door, some faraway laugh. The low bell from chapel or monastery marking another piece of the night. No one can quite agree whether bathing is better for health or merely for reminding the body what hope feels like. Medieval opinion is mixed. Some physicians praise warmth for opening the pores and easing stiffness. Others worry baths can leave a man vulnerable. Softened, too open to corrupted air. This is the sort of age in which a leech may be applied with confidence and a pleasant soak regarded with suspicion. You choose, for tonight at least, to side with the tub. You wash with the coarse soap, working it into cloth and skin. The day comes away in small proofs: mud from the ride, sweat from the yard, dust from the records room, the trace of horse and hound and smoke, the water clouds. A knight may spend his hours among ritual and rank, but dirt remains the great social equalizer. Even nobility must eventually come to terms with its own elbows. After the bath comes the second, less poetic part of bodily care, the inspection of aches. You settle on the stool with a blanket around your shoulders while the remaining warmth still clings to you, and reach for the little bowl of salve or ointment left nearby. It smells of rendered fat, herbs, perhaps comfrey or rue, and something sharply bitter that promises either healing or revenge. Such remedies are part of castle life as surely as candles are. Old bruises, stiff joints, saddle rub, a pulled shoulder from shield work, the lasting complaints of damp weather in bone, these are attended not with dramatic speeches but with grease, herbs, muttered disapproval, and routine. You rub salve into one shoulder first, where the mounted drill and the lance-work have left a dull soreness, then the knees, then perhaps the lower back, which protests less than it did an hour ago but still with conviction. Some swear by goose fat for aching joints. Others prefer crushed rosemary with vinegar, or warm cloth steeped in herbs, or little charms tied around the limb with whispered prayers to saints whose portfolios have expanded over the years, even now. It is hard to tell where medicine ends and comfort begins, but in a hard world the distinction is not always useful. On a shelf nearby sit other quiet tools of endurance: a comb of bone, a cloth for binding a strain, a little packet of dried mint to sweeten breath, perhaps even a leech jar if the household physician or barber surgeon has been active lately. Leeches remain a source of grim confidence in many circles. If a man has too much blood, too much heat, too much swelling, too much of nearly anything, someone stands ready to suggest removing a portion of him. Medieval medicine can be admirably decisive in this respect. You catch sight of yourself in a small polished metal mirror, not clear enough to flatter or condemn, only enough to suggest the shape of a tired face under damp hair. The romances do not mention this either, the ordinary human look of a knight near the end of day. Not sternly magnificent, not glowing with honour, just worn, thoughtful, and slightly annoyed by one's own knees. You comb your hair back and dry it as best you can with linen. A fresh shirt waits folded on the chest, cleaner than the one you remove and carrying that distinct smell of stored cloth dry wool, lavender, a little cedar if the household is lucky, a little dust if it is honest. Pulling on fresh linen after a bath is one of those pleasures medieval life offers rarely enough to make a person nearly religious about it. There may be a barber surgeon in the household, and perhaps earlier in the week he trimmed beards, lanced some unfortunate swelling, set a finger, or recommended a syrup no one trusted but everyone took anyway. Tonight, however, your needs are smaller and more private. A nick from shaving earlier in the day has dried along the jaw. A bruise at the forearm has gone yellow at the edges. A callus near the palm is thick from rains and practice. The body tells its own record more plainly than parchment if someone takes the time to read it. A little knock comes at the door. A servant enters quietly to remove the tub or carry away the water, perhaps leaving in its place a warming pan passed briefly through the bedclothes, or a cup of something mild small ale, watered wine, or an herbal tisane meant to calm the humours. The humours are forever being calmed, balanced, provoked, drained, or offended. If medieval life has one great theme besides cold, it may be the conviction that the body is always slightly out of tune and must be negotiated with. The servant also leaves a bundle of dried herbs to hang near the bed or lay beneath the pillow. Mugwort for sleep, perhaps, or lavender, or rosemary against foul air. Some swear herbs under the pillow keep nightmares away. Others say they merely make a chamber smell less like boots. Both benefits are welcome. Once alone again, you move more slowly, the kind of slowness that comes not from laziness but from having nothing left to prove to the evening. You gather your discarded clothes, noting where a seam needs mending, where mud still clings to a hem, where one glove ought to be dried nearer the hearth tomorrow if you do not wish it to become a rigid little monument. A knight's possessions, like his horse tack, require endless notice. Leave one wet garment folded wrongly and it will repay you with mildew, stiffness, or a smell fit to turn saints aside. The candle on the table burns lower, and its light catches the half-burned stub from the night before still resting beside the comb. You remember the chapel candles, the hall candles, the lantern in the passage, everywhere in this world. Little lights held back darkness one flame at a time. It feels fitting somehow that the day should narrow now to this small pool of gold around wash basin, shirt, salve jar, and bed. Those who tell the tale never fully agree what knights do when they are not fighting. Some imagine feasts, flirtation, and polished ease. Others imagine endless training and stern religious devotion. The truth, as ever, is less dramatic and more intimate. A great deal of it is this tending the body that must rise again tomorrow, listening to the stones cool around you, and submitting with quiet grace to soap, herbs, soreness, and the very human need to be warm before sleep. You finish dressing in fresh linen and heavier night layers, draw the blanket closer around your shoulders, and step toward the bedchamber proper. Somewhere beyond the shutter, the night has deepened. The keep is quieter now. The world is beginning, at last, to settle. When you leave the little warmth of washing behind and step fully into the chamber for the night, the quiet feels almost ceremonial, not silent, never that. A medieval keep is too full of life for true silence, but quieter in layers, softer at the edges, as if the whole place is drawing its wool cloak around its shoulders and preparing to endure the dark. Your room is lit by a candle, and perhaps the last faint breath of a lantern in the passage beyond, enough to turn the walls honey gold in places and leave the corners to their own old shadows. The bed stands waiting in its usual, slightly dubious dignity, a wooden frame, ropes beneath, a mattress stuffed with straw, wool, or whatever optimism the household has been able to afford and maintain. Over it lie blankets of rough wool, a coverlet if fortune smiles, and perhaps furs if rank or weather insists. The linens are cool when first touched. The room smells of dried herbs, beeswax, clean linen, cold plaster, and the faint ghost of smoke that seems to work its way into every chamber in a keep, no matter how carefully doors are shut. On the stool nearby rests your belt, gloves, and the knife you set aside each night in the same place, because habit is one of the few luxuries that cost nothing. You do not go to bed at once, a night seldom does. Night has duties of its own, and one of them is watch. From somewhere outside comes the low call of a guard on the wall walk, answered a moment later from farther along the curtain wall. The sound travels strangely in the dark, flattened by stone, lifted by open air, and threaded through with the wind. It is not an alarm. It is reassurance, which is perhaps more important. A keep at night lives on small proofs that someone remains awake on behalf of everyone else. You pull your cloak over the cleaner linen beneath and make your way out again, this time not toward hall, chapel, or stable, but up. The stair to the battlements is narrow and winding, built less for elegance than for defence, with steps worn shallow in the middle by generations of boots. The stone under your hand is cold and slightly damp. A slit of air moves downward from above, carrying the smell of night frost, smoke, wet earth, and distant water. Halfway up, a lantern in a niche throws just enough light to keep a man from mistaking the wall for the next step, which in this place counts as thoughtful architecture. At the top, the wall walk opens around you. The night is deep now, though not fully black. A winter sky carries its own dimness, a pale wash of cloud and thin stars where the air is clear, silvering the outlines of roof, tower, and distant field. The wind is sharper here, sliding over the stone with no patience at all for comfort. It catches at your cloak and slips fingers through the seams of your gloves. Below, the inner ward lies subdued and broken into islands of light. One lantern by the stable, a glow from the hall shutters, a narrow beam from the chapel where perhaps a candle still burns before the altar. Beyond the walls the village is mostly dark, save for one or two cottage windows holding embers or a last small flame. Farther off still, the land becomes suggestion rather than detail hedges, fields, roads, the stream by the mill, all hidden under darkness and remembered more than seen. A watchman stands nearby with a spear in one hand and a hood pulled low. He nods when he recognizes you, then returns to the patient business of looking outward. Watch is not dramatic most nights. That is the strange burden of it. A man stands for hours, peering into dark that rarely changes, listening for sounds that usually mean nothing and occasionally mean everything. A horse shifting on the road, a fox near the ditch, a drunken villager singing to the wrong gate, wind in brush, a branch tapping wood, a cart delayed later than expected, rarely more. Yet if more comes, it comes to the listening. You pace slowly along the battlement, boots dull against stone. The parapet is cold beneath your gloved hand. Below. A dog barks once from somewhere beyond the outer yard and is answered by another farther off. Then the sound dies. From the monastery in the distance comes the bell for the late hour, thin and solemn through the night air. It reaches the keep with a kind of softened authority, as if even darkness must make room for prayer. No one can quite agree whether night watch is meant to guard against enemies, thieves, fire, or the imagination. In truth, it serves all four. Darkness enlarges everything. A harmless sound becomes suspicious. A shadow by a hedge becomes a man becomes three. A wandering lantern on the road may be a traveller, a messenger, a drunk, or one of those corpse lights country people swear rise above marshes where the dead cannot rest. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. The watchman beside you says quietly that his uncle once followed such a light for 1/2 a mile before discovering it was a monk with a bad lantern and worse singing. You tell him that is comforting only in a very narrow sense. He gives the smallest possible laugh. The keep itself makes sounds at night that daytime hides. Timber settles, a shutter rattles and then stills. Somewhere below, a horse blows through its nose, the sound warm and alive in the dark. A chain moves lightly against wood at the gatehouse. Rainwater drips from a spout into the yard with maddening regularity. These are the sounds a knight comes to know when no battle fills his ears. The place has a night voice, and to belong here is to learn it well enough not to fear every syllable. You pause where the wall turns toward the open country. From here you can just make out the road you rode this morning, pale in places where frost has touched it again. The shrine by the bend is invisible, though you know it is there. So is the bridge by the mill, still needing timber. So are the fields, the cottages, the hedges, the granaries, the sheep pens, the sleeping people whose lives knot themselves into the authority of this keep, whether they bless it or curse it. By day those things present themselves one by one. At night they gather into a single thought. All this lies under your watch, however partial, however symbolic. A knight in peace does not only fight for land, he stands for it in the dark, listens above it, and lets it sleep while he stays awake a little longer. Below in the inner ward, a lantern crosses from one doorway to another and vanishes. Perhaps a servant finishing late work, perhaps someone carrying broth to a sick child in the lower quarters, perhaps the chaplain making one last round. Castles never entirely sleep, they doze in shifts. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the true burden of knighthood lies in the rare moments of danger or in the endless hours spent preparing for it, imagining it, guarding against it, and being willing, at any hour, to rise when called. The armour hanging in the armoury below may not be needed tonight. The sword at your side may remain undrawn. The watch may pass with nothing more threatening than wind and a fox. Yet readiness itself becomes a habit, and habit a kind of second body. The watchman points once toward the far field, where for a moment you think you see movement, a shifting pale shape near the hedgerow. You both stand still. It moves again, then separates into two sheep who have somehow achieved a position beyond the good sense of their owner, and are now drifting back toward a gap in the enclosure. The watchman exhales. Agents of chaos, he says. It is the most eloquent thing anyone has said all day. You remain on the wall a little longer, not from necessity only, but from the peculiar stillness the battlements offer. Here the day seems to gather itself differently. Dawn in the bailey, the cold basin water, the smoky breakfast under rafters, the training yard, the stable dark, the ride over the manor, the court of petty wrongs, the chapel candles, the scratch of quills, the hawk rising into evening, the murmur by the fire, the hot water in the tub. All of it feels both near and already passing. A single day for a night when not in battle, and not one part of it wasted, though little of it would look glorious from a distance. Another bell sounds, fainter this time. The wind eases briefly, then returns. Your hands have grown cold again, even in gloves. That is usually the sign. Night watch is best admired in reasonable portions when one is not assigned to it until dawn. You nod to the guard and turn back toward the stair. Behind you he resumes his pacing, spear upright, boots measured, the old rhythm of vigilance continuing without ceremony. You descend into the keep once more, into stone that holds a little more warmth than the open wall, into passages lit by failing candles and the quiet after most voices have gone. At a turning in the stair, you pass a narrow slit window and catch one last glimpse of the night outside the faint line of the hills. The dark fold of the fields, and above them a sky that looks very old and entirely uninterested in human rank. That may be the most useful thought of all before sleep. When you return to your chamber, the candle there has burned lower, wax leaning down one side like a tired shoulder. The bed waits as before. The blankets seem warmer now simply because the rest of the world is colder. You set aside the cloak, loosen your shoulders, and listen for a moment to the keep around you distant steps, a door bar falling into place, the mutter of the wind, then almost nothing. And in that near stillness, after the wall walk and the cold stars and the humble vigilance of men who guard sleeping fields from whatever may or may not come, you understand that a night's life outside battle is not empty space between heroic moments. It is watchfulness itself, quiet, repetitive, dutiful, and deeply human, carried out under bells, wind, and darkness while the whole little world of stone and straw rests behind him. When you return to your chamber, the night has deepened into that gentle, enveloping quiet that only comes after a full day has spent itself completely. The candle has burned low, its flame smaller now, leaning slightly as though it, too, is tired of holding back the dark. The air in the room is cool, but not unkind. The faint scent of lavender and rosemary lingers near the bed, softened by clean linen and the last warmth left in your skin from the bath. You move more slowly now. There is no one to observe you, no posture to maintain, no rank to perform. The weight of the day settles into its final shape, not heavy, not troubling, simply present, like a cloak set carefully aside. The bed receives you with a quiet creak. The ropes beneath shift slightly, the mattress yielding just enough to welcome your tired body without promising too much comfort. The wool blankets are rough but warm, and you draw them up slowly, feeling the small luxury of retained heat gathering around you. Outside, the wind moves softly along the stone, no longer sharp, just steady, like breath through an old instrument. For a while, you do not sleep. You listen. Somewhere in the keep, a door closes gently. Somewhere farther off, a guard's step crosses the wall walk, then fades. A horse shifts in its stall below, the soft thud of hoof against wood echoing faintly upward. The monastery bell, distant now, marks another quiet passing of time. These sounds are no longer interruptions. They are part of the place, part of the rhythm that has carried you from dawn until now. Your hands rest against the blanket. They still remember the day in fragments, the cold bite of water in the morning basin, the weight of the waster in the yard, the steady grip of reins, the rough edge of parchment beneath your fingers, the warmth of the cup in the hall, the smooth curve of the hawk's flight overhead. All of it lingers, not sharply, but gently, as if the body is folding the memory away for later use. No one can quite agree what it truly meant to be a knight when not in battle. Some imagine it as waiting, a long quiet between moments of glory. Others imagine it as ease, a life of comfort wrapped in stone and ceremony. But lying here now, with the day complete around you, it feels like something else entirely. It feels like continuity, a thread drawn steadily through cold mornings, shared meals, small judgments, quiet prayers, practical work, and watchful nights. A life shaped not by singular acts of courage, but by repetition, by duty returned to again and again, until it becomes almost invisible. Even now, it is hard to tell whether strength comes from those rare moments of danger, or from the countless ordinary hours that prepare a man to meet them without breaking. The candle flickers once more, then steadies. Your breathing slows. The keep, so full of movement only hours ago, now rests in layers. Beneath you, the stones hold their silence. Around you, the walls stand patient and unchanged. Beyond them, the fields lie under darkness, the village tucked into itself, the roads empty save for the occasional late traveller or restless wind. Everything has drawn inward. You shift slightly, finding a more comfortable place within the blankets. The herbs beneath your pillow release their faint scent with the movement, something green and calming, like a memory of summer fields far from stone and duty. Your eyes grow heavier, though your thoughts still drift. You think, briefly, of the bridge that must be repaired, of the tenants who will wake before you tomorrow, of the steward already planning the next day's accounts, of the chaplain lighting another candle at dawn. The cycle continues, as it always has, as it always will, and yet there is no urgency in it now, only the quiet understanding that this is enough. The wind softens further, slipping into a low, steady hush. The distant bell does not sound again. The horse below has settled. Even the watch seems to have found its rhythm, footsteps spaced evenly in the dark. Your body sinks more deeply into the bed. The last of the day's tension unwinds, not all at once, but in small, patient releases. Shoulders, back, legs, breath. The mind follows, letting go of detail, then structure, then even the need to remember. The candle burns lower still. Its light grows softer, warmer, less insistent, and in that dim, quiet chamber, surrounded by stone, wool, and the faint lingering warmth of a life lived steadily through one long medieval day, you drift gently towards sleep, not as a knight waiting for battle, but as a man who has done enough, who has walked the cold yard, shared the smoky hall, ridden the muddy roads, listened to the small troubles of others, stood beneath the chapel's quiet light, watched the dark from the wall, and returned at last to rest. The world beyond your chamber fades. The keep softens into shadow. The night deepens, and you, wrapped in warmth and memory, slip quietly into its calm embrace. As sleep finally takes hold, the last traces of the day dissolve into something softer, less defined. The edges of the keep blur into darkness. The sounds fade into a distant, comforting hush, and the weight of duty lifts gently away, leaving only stillness behind. There is nothing more required of you now, no roads to walk, no judgments to make, no watch to keep, only rest. And in that rest, the medieval world itself seems to dim and quiet, like a fire settling into embers, its glow steady and warm, its presence reassuring even as it fades. The stone walls no longer feel cold, the wind no longer presses, the night no longer waits, everything simply is. And in that soft, final stillness, you sleep.